The sky above Planet Namek had never been quiet, not since Frieza arrived with his armada, not since the Dragon Balls began drawing every desperate, power-hungry force in the galaxy toward this lonely green world, and certainly not since Goku had touched down with that familiar wild-haired intensity that made even seasoned warriors feel the ground shift beneath their feet. Namek was a world under siege, its coral-colored sky bruised with the smoke of burning villages, its vast plains scarred by craters that told the story of battles fought at speeds the planet's gentle inhabitants could never have imagined. 3 suns burned overhead in their eternal rotation, casting long amber shadows across a landscape that had once been peaceful and was now a theater of war. It was into this theater that the rift appeared. It came without warning, without ceremony, without even the courtesy of a dramatic buildup. One moment the sky between the second and third suns was empty. The next, something tore through it, not with the clean dimensional precision of instant transmission, not with the howling energy signature of a space pod burning through atmosphere, but with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. A spiraling tear of blue-white light opened like a wound in the fabric of space, its edges crackling with an energy that felt fundamentally different from anything the Z-Fighters had encountered. Not Kai, not the Force, not magic in any form Piccolo could identify from his vast mental library of supernatural phenomena. Something older, something earthier, something that smelled, if energy could smell, like pine forests and lightning, and something unmistakably alive. And then Naruto Uzumaki fell out of it. He came through tumbling, which was not dignified, but dignity had never been high on Naruto's list of priorities. He was spinning head over heels, his orange and black jumpsuit catching the amber light of Namek's triple suns, his blonde spiky hair whipping in every direction, his blue eyes wide with the particular expression of someone who had absolutely no idea where they were, but had already decided they were going to deal with it. He was mid-shout when he broke through, something that sounded like SASUKEU absolute, before the word got lost in the rush of alien atmosphere flooding his lungs. He hit the ground the way Naruto always hit things, with maximum impact and minimum grace. The crater he made was not enormous by Dragon Ball standards. It was perhaps 15 meters wide, 3 meters deep, and accompanied by a shockwave that flattened the surrounding coral grass in a perfect circle. I named standards by any standard that didn't involve people who could casually destroy planets. It was the kind of impact that would have killed a normal human being several times over. Rocks bounced, dust billowed. One of Frieza's distant patrol ships, cruising at low altitude 3 kilometers away, rocked in the pressure wave and its occupants grabbed their consoles with confused alarm. Naruto sat up in the crater, coughed once and looked around. "Okay," he said to no one in particular. "Okay, this is not Konoha." Observation was by any measure correct. The sky was the wrong color, too amber, too heavy, threaded with those unfamiliar clouds that moved in slow, majestic arcs as if they had nowhere urgent to be. The ground beneath him was a pale greenish-gray, and the plants surrounding the crater were unlike anything in the land of fire, tall coral structures that swayed gently, and low-growing vegetation the color of sea glass. The distance, enormous rounded mountains rose from the plains, their peaks lost in low cloud. Everything was vast, everything was quiet in the way that things were quiet right before they became extremely loud. Naruto pressed his palm flat against the alien earth and reached instinctively for what shinobi did when they entered unknown territory. He extended his senses. Sage mode was not something he could hold indefinitely, but he didn't need to fully activate it to feel the natural energy of a place. He closed his eyes for half a second, let his chakra reach outward like invisible fingertips and felt a lot, an enormous amount of something. It was power, but it was power of a kind he had never encountered. Back home, he could sense chakra, the mingling of physical and spiritual energy that was the fundamental currency of a ninja's existence. He could sense the vast oceanic reserves of the tailed beasts, the cold, precise power of a skilled sharing user, the earthy warmth of a sage drawing on natural energy. He knew what strong felt like. He had fought Madara Uchiha. He had clashed with Kaguya Otsutsuki. He was not, by any reasonable standard, someone who frightened easily, but what he felt radiating from multiple points across this landscape made him pause. There were beings here, several of them, scattered across a range of several kilometers, whose energy signatures were unlike anything he had a framework for. One of them, the closest, blazed like a sun that had decided to become a person. Not the cold, terrifying vastness of the Ten Tails, not the focused, singular intensity of a tailed beast, but something warm and almost joyful in its immensity, like a fire that genuinely enjoyed being a fire. Another was harder, colder, more structured, a wall of compressed power that practically hummed with pride. And in the distance, further away but somehow more present, something that made every instinct Naruto possessed quietly suggest that whatever that was, it would be polite to not be directly in front of it. He opened his eyes. "Okay," he said again and stood up, brushing alien dust from his jumpsuit. "Okay, I've been in weird situations before. I can handle this. I just need to figure out where I am, how I got here, and how to get back." He paused. "And maybe find some food. Seriously, where's the ramen on this planet?" He climbed out of the crater, hopped to the rim, and looked around at the wider landscape and saw, perhaps 200 meters away, a group of people staring at him with varying degrees of alarm, confusion, and in one case a scouter pressed to the side of a head. He raised his hand in a wave. "Hey, sorry about the crater. Do any of you know where?" The scouter exploded. Gohan had been 7 minutes into what was supposed to be a moment of relative quiet, a concept that existed only theoretically on Planet Namek, when the rift appeared in the sky. He had been standing near the remains of a destroyed Frieza Force outpost with Krillin, the two of them trying to make sense of their next move, in a situation that had spiraled so far beyond manageable that manageable felt like a word from a foreign language. His father was somewhere on this planet, presumably recovered enough from his injuries to matter, though the specifics of Goku's recovery timeline had always been more art than science. Vegeta was doing what Vegeta did, which was exist in a state of barely controlled aggression and occasionally do something either incredibly useful or catastrophically counterproductive. Bulma was in her capsule house, protected and monitoring communications, and then something fell out of a hole in the sky and made a crater. Krillin's hand went up immediately, a yellow Kai blast forming between his fingers with practiced ease. His Kai sense was among the most refined on the battlefield, not at Vegeta's level, not at Piccolo's level, but sharp enough to have kept him alive through situations that should have killed him 3 times over. He reached out, tasted the newcomer's energy, and frowned. "That's weird," he said. "Weird how?" Gohan asked, his own senses pushing outward. He was more naturally gifted than Krillin acknowledged, a raw talent that even he didn't fully understand, and what he sensed now made him tilt his head the way his father did when something genuinely puzzled him. "I can't get a clean read on it. It doesn't feel like Kai exactly. Doesn't feel like anything I've felt before," Krillin said. "But it's not threatening, it's actually kind of." He searched for the word. "Warm," Gohan nodded slowly. Whatever this person was, whatever had just happened, the energy signature didn't feel hostile. It felt he reached for his father's vocabulary. It felt like someone who had a good heart. That wasn't a scientific assessment, but in the Z-Fighters' world, it was often the most reliable one. They were still processing this when the newcomer climbed out of his crater, looked around, spotted them, and waved like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn on a hiking trail. "Sorry about the crater. Do any of you know where?" Krillin's scouter, a model captured from a downed Frieza soldier and recalibrated by Bulma, sparked once, emitted a high-pitched whine, and then simply gave up existing in one piece. Fragments scattered across the alien grass. Krillin stared at his empty hand for a moment before looking back at the blonde stranger. "Huh," he said. The stranger was staring at the exploded scouter with genuine curiosity. He hopped off the crater rim and walked toward them with the loose, slightly bow-legged gait of someone who had spent a lot of time moving fast and had never quite adjusted to moving slow. Up close, he was maybe 16 or 17, though there was something in his eyes that suggested he had lived through considerably more than his age implied. His clothes were strange, an orange outfit with black accents, the kind of bold, unsubtle color choice that suggested either tremendous confidence or complete indifference to stealth. He had whisker marks on his cheeks, 3 on each side, which Gohan found inexplicably interesting. He also had blue eyes that were currently fixed on Krillin with an expression of apologetic concern. "Did I do that? Sorry about that." I've been told I have a weird effect on measuring devices. Mostly it was this one time with a chakra sensor during an exam, but he stopped, clearly remembering that none of this context meant anything to these people. He tried again. Hi, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I'm a ninja from the village hidden in the leaves. I have absolutely no idea where I am or how I got here, but I'm not dangerous unless someone attacks me first, and I'm really hoping one of you speaks a language I understand because this is already confusing enough. Gohan blinked. Krillin blinked. We understand you, Gohan said, which was strange, because the boy had arrived from what appeared to be another dimension entirely and should by all rights have been speaking something incomprehensible. That was a mystery for later. Naruto's whole face changed. It was remarkable, the expressiveness of it. The relief that flooded across his features was so genuine, so unguarded, that even Krillin, who had seen a lot of things, found himself instinctively relaxing. This kid was not a threat. Whatever he was, whatever energy source powered him, whatever universe had produced someone who fell through dimensional rifts in an orange jumpsuit and immediately tried to make friends with the people he'd nearly landed on, he was not a threat. Oh, thank everything, Naruto breathed. Okay, great, so can you tell me where I am? Is this still in the land of no? Obviously it's not. Look at those mountains. That's not normal mountain coloring, and there are 3 suns. There are definitely 3 suns. I counted them. Is this another dimension? Did Kaguya do something? Is this another one of those space-time ninjutsu situations? Because I really thought we dealt with all of that. This is Planet Namek, Krillin said, because it was the simplest true thing he could offer. Naruto processed this for a moment. Planet, he repeated. So I'm on a different planet. Different planet in a different universe, probably, Gohan said carefully, watching the newcomer's reaction. He was gauging the way his mother had taught him to gauge, looking for the spike of panic or aggression that would tell him how the next 60 seconds were going to go. Naruto stared at him. Then he looked up at the 3 suns. Then he looked at the alien landscape, then back at Gohan, then at the alien landscape again. He exhaled slowly through his nose, a long, controlled breath that spoke to a discipline beneath the cheerful exterior. Okay, he said for the 3rd time. And then remarkably, okay, different universe, that's fine, I've dealt with worse. A pause. Probably. It was at that moment that the air pressure changed, not gradually. Not with the gradual escalation that gave experienced fighters a chance to orient. It changed the way things changed when someone very powerful decided they were no longer interested in patience. A sudden, absolute compression, as if the atmosphere had received a memo about the new order of things and was complying immediately. The coral grass flattened. The dust that had settled from Naruto's crater lifted again and streamed sideways. Gohan and Krillin turned simultaneously, their bodies dropping into combat readiness with the automatic precision of people who had survived this particular sensation many times. Vegeta descended from above like a verdict. He landed 20 meters away, arms crossed, the wind of his arrival sending ripples through the alien grass. He looked at Naruto the way he looked at everything that couldn't immediately be identified and categorized, with the flat analytical coldness of someone calculating whether something was worth his time. His scouter, a more expensive model than Krillin's improvised one, was pressed to his temple. What, Vegeta said, is this? It was not a question. It was a declaration that an explanation was owed. Naruto looked at Vegeta. He tilted his head. Something passed through his expression, recognition of a type, not of a person but of a category. The same way he had once looked at Sasuke. The same way he looked at people who wore their strength like armor over something they couldn't afford to examine. I'm Naruto, he said with the same simple directness he offered to everyone. I just got here, I don't want any trouble. Vegeta's scouter emitted a reading. Then it emitted a confused secondary reading. Then it emitted a sound that scouters were not engineered to make, something between a statistical error alert and a mechanical sigh of resignation, and went dark. Vegeta looked at his dead scouter. He looked at Naruto. Something shifted in his expression that was not quite alarm and not quite interest, and was entirely unlike anything Krillin had seen on the Saiyan prince's face before. What is your power level? Vegeta said very precisely. My what? Naruto asked. Your power level. Naruto looked at Gohan. Gohan gave him the smallest apologetic shrug. He means how strong you are. Naruto considered this. Strong enough, I guess. I beat some pretty strong people. I don't really count. In the far distance, a massive energy signature that had been monitoring the situation with cold, precise attention, something like a general running calculations on an unexpected variable on the battlefield, turned its full focus toward the location of two destroyed scouters and one very confused blonde boy. 3 kilometers up, from the bridge window of his personal warship, Zarbin turned to Dodoria with an expression of studied calm that concealed something considerably less calm. Frieza, he said into the comm channel, there appears to be something new on the surface. Voice that answered was pleasant in the way that deep cold was pleasant, technically the absence of something, but with its own distinctive character. Is there, said Frieza. Scouters can't get a reading on it. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, no longer. How interesting, said Frieza. Don't engage, observe. I'll handle this personally when the time is right. Below on the alien grass of Namek, Naruto Uzumaki was asking Krillin if the planet had anything like ramen, and Krillin was trying to explain what a senzu bean was, and Gohan was quietly thinking that whatever this newcomer was, whatever had brought him here, the day had just become significantly more complicated. And in the back of Naruto's mind, sealed behind the iron bars of a cage he had learned to open rather than be opened by, something ancient and vast and orange-red stirred with an interest it rarely showed. Kurama was awake, and Kurama was paying attention. If you want to see more legendary shinobi facing off against the mightiest warriors in the universe, hit that subscribe button and drop what crossover you want to see next in the comments below. Believe it. Goku found him first. This was, in retrospect, entirely predictable. Goku had a gift, some called it instinct, some called it the Saiyan battle sense, Bulma called it that ridiculous radar you have for anyone interesting, for locating people whose energy signatures were worth investigating. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't strategic in the calculated way Vegeta was strategic. It was the same impulse that made him stop mid-battle to complement an enemy's technique. The same warmth that had convinced a former assassin and a reformed demon and a man made of stitched-together body parts to lay down their lives for him. Goku moved toward interesting things the way sunflowers move toward light, not because he decided to, but because it was simply what he did. He found Naruto sitting cross-legged on a flat rock near the edge of one of Namek's shallow inland seas, watching the triple suns begin their slow rotation toward the horizon. Gohan and Krillin had given him a brief orientation. Planet Namek, Dragon Balls, Frieza, extreme danger. Yes, there were people who could destroy planets. No, that was not an exaggeration. And Naruto had listened with the focused attentiveness of someone who had learned that information was survival. Then he had asked to sit quietly for a moment, which Gohan had respected, and Krillin had found impressive, and Vegeta had found incomprehensible before flying away to do something more productive with his contempt. Goku landed behind him without fanfare. Naruto didn't turn around immediately. His senses had registered the arrival, that enormous sun-bright energy signature he detected from the crater, closer now, carrying that same quality of warmth that made it almost impossible to read as hostile regardless of its scale. He let himself finish the breath he was on, completed the mental inventory he'd been running, chakra levels, Kurama's status, physical condition, what he knew about this universe, what he needed to know, and then turned. His first impression of Goku was that someone had taken the concept of a fighter and made it entirely sincere. Most powerful people Naruto had met wore their power in different ways. Madara wore it like a throne, Sasuke wore it like a wound, Kaguya wore it like whether something that simply was indifferent to observation. Even Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the sage of 6 paths himself, wore it with the particular weight of someone who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time. Goku wore it like he'd just come back from training and was genuinely happy to see you. He was smiling, not the polite smile of someone managing a social situation, but the real kind, the uncalculated kind, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. He was taller than Naruto, broader through the shoulders, with a build that suggested every muscle had been earned through years of work that had been genuinely enjoyed rather than grimly endured. His hair defied explanation and apparently gravity as a secondary concern. He was looking at Naruto with the specific expression of someone who had found something that made perfect sense to them even when it made no sense to anyone else. "Got a weird energy," Goku said by way of greeting. It was not an insult. It was the most honest, direct observation he could offer. "Yeah," Naruto said. "So do you. Yours is bigger though." Goku considered this. "Is it?" "I'm not really at full power right now. I was pretty beaten up recently." He said this the way someone might mention having caught a cold, a temporary inconvenience, notable mainly for the timing. He sat down on the rock next to Naruto with the casual ease of someone who had never once considered that he might not be welcome. "I'm Goku. Sorry I didn't come find you sooner. Gohan told me you arrived pretty dramatically." "I didn't mean to make a crater," Naruto said. "I was kind of in the middle of something when I got pulled through." "What kind of something?" Naruto's expression shifted. Something complicated moved through it, a layering of emotion that was there and gone in the space of a second. "A fight, a really important one, somebody I need to get back to." He looked at the alien sea, its surface catching the amber light in long, slow ripples. "I don't know how I got here or how to get back. That's my first problem." "Can figure that out," Goku said with absolute confidence, as if dimensional displacement was a scheduling inconvenience rather than a potentially permanent catastrophe. "We've dealt with weird space-time stuff before. Usually someone knows something about it." Naruto looked at him sideways. "You're very calm about this." "Well, panicking doesn't really help." It was such a simple statement, so completely unperformed, that Naruto found himself caught off guard. He'd expected caution, calculation, the particular wariness that powerful people usually directed at other powerful people whose nature they hadn't cataloged yet. He hadn't expected someone to just sit down next to him and immediately treat the situation as solvable. "Kind of like someone I know," Naruto said before he'd consciously decided to say it. "Yeah." Goku seemed genuinely interested. "Good kind or bad kind?" "Good kind, mostly." Naruto almost smiled. "Annoying kind too, but the good kind of annoying." Goku laughed, a real laugh, uncomplicated and bright, and somewhere in the architecture of Naruto's guard, something shifted a degree or two toward open. Bulma's lab, such as it was, occupied the largest room of her capsule house. She had set it up on the second afternoon of their arrival on Namek. Because Bulma briefs did not go to war zones without equipment, and the suggestion that she might had apparently offended her deeply enough that no one had raised it twice. The room was small by her standards back home, but contained more functional scientific instrumentation than most professional research facilities, because Bulma had spent enough time in field conditions to understand that compactness and capability were not mutually exclusive if you were willing to put in the engineering hours. She stared at the data on her screen and then stared at it again, in case the second look produced different results. It didn't. "This doesn't make any sense," she announced to the room. Krillin, who had been drafted as a test subject comparison, looked up from where he was sitting with sensors taped to his forearms. "What doesn't?" "His readings." Bulma gestured at the screen with the particular frustration of a scientist who had encountered something that refused to cooperate with existing theory. "I can measure your Kai. I can measure Gohan's Kai. I can measure Vegeta's Kai," though he was extremely unpleasant about it. "The sensor can detect energy, quantify it, give me something to work with. But whatever this kid is running on, it's not Kai. The sensor keeps trying to classify it and failing. It's like trying to measure temperature with a scale." Krillin frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean they're not the same kind of thing." Bulma pulled up two waveform displays side by side. "Look, Kai, yours, Gohan's, everyone's has a consistent energetic signature. It reads like a single type of force expressed at different magnitudes. Whatever Naruto is producing has two distinct components that are interacting with each other. One reads almost like Kai, but not quite. It has a physical component and something else, something that feels almost mental or spiritual. And then there's a second signature underneath it, much larger, much older, that my instruments keep trying to classify as a life form rather than an energy source." Krillin was quiet for a moment. "A life form, very large life form." Bulma looked at the screen again. "Contained inside a teenage boy." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Should we tell him we know?" Krillin asked. "He probably already knows," Bulma said. Whatever that thing is, he doesn't seem scared of it. He seems like someone who's made peace with something complicated." She paused, which, given what Gohan said about his personality, I find both impressive and slightly concerning. Vegeta had run the numbers 3 times. He stood alone on a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from the main group, arms crossed, staring at nothing in a way that meant he was staring at everything. The destroyed scouter was in his pocket. He would rebuild it or find a replacement. But the data it had managed to capture before its failure was stored in his memory with the perfect recall of a man who had survived by never forgetting anything important. The reading had been incomplete. The scouter had failed before it could finalize a power level, which meant he had no number to work with. What he had was a fragment, an initial capture of energy output before the instrument gave up, and a very clear memory of what it had felt like when the boy's energy expanded in response to being scanned. It hadn't felt like anyone he knew. Kai had a quality to it. You could tell a lot about a fighter from the character of their energy. Kakarot's felt like open sky, powerful and somewhat uncontainable. His own was more concentrated, a diamond pressure. Frieza's was cold and absolute. Piccolo's had a specific Nankian resonance that was distinct once you knew to look for it. Every Kai signature was at its core a variation on the same fundamental force. The boy's energy was not a variation on anything Vegeta had encountered. He was annoyed to find himself reaching for non-tactical vocabulary, alive in a way that Kai wasn't, like the difference between a river and the ocean. Kai, even at cosmic levels, was force-directed. What he felt from the newcomer was force in relationship. 2 things engaged with each other in a way that produced something that didn't simplify neatly into power level. And then there was the other thing, the thing underneath. Vegeta was not easily impressed. He had been raised in an environment where weakness was not tolerated and where the definition of weakness expanded to include anything that suggested your position in the hierarchy was not as secure as you believed. He had survived Frieza's court. He had survived his own ruthlessness. He had so far survived Namek, which was an ongoing project. He did not fright. But for one fraction of a second, when his scouter had touched the edge of that second energy signature, the one beneath the boy's own power, vast and contained and ancient, something old in his Saiyan blood had recognized it the way prey recognized a predator in the dark. Not by sight, by the way the air changed. Whatever was living inside that boy, it was not small. He filed this information in the precise mental architecture he maintained for existential threats and walked back toward the group, because Vegeta did not stand on outcroppings contemplating his feelings. He gathered intelligence, and he used it. The attempt to formally recruit Naruto came from 3 directions within the first 2 hours, which Gohan would later describe as about average for people who show up here with unusual abilities. The first attempt was from a contingent of surviving Nankian warriors who had watched his arrival from a distance and sent an elder to investigate. The elder, a tall, dignified Nankian named Murray, who had the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime being the person others came to with impossible problems, approached Naruto with the measured courtesy of his people and explained the situation on Namek with precision and without embellishment. Frieza sought the Dragon Balls. Many Nankians had already died. The Dragon Balls could grant any wish. If Naruto possessed unusual abilities, perhaps he would consider using them in defense of a people who had not asked for this war. Naruto listened to all of this without interrupting, which the elder later told Gohan was more than most visitors managed. When Murray finished, Naruto was quiet for a moment. "You have people protecting civilians right now?" he asked. Murray blinked. "Our remaining warriors do what they can. Can you take me to the villages that are most at risk?" It was not the answer Murray had expected. Most powerful individuals, in his limited experience of them, responded to requests for help with negotiations. What would they receive in return? What were the terms? How did this benefit them specifically? The boy had skipped all of that and gone directly to the practical question of where he could be most useful. "You would help us," Murray said carefully, "without any condition." Naruto looked at him with an expression that suggested the question was technically sensible but had missed something fundamental. "You've got kids in those villages, right?" "Yes." "Then yeah," Naruto said. "Obviously, The second recruitment attempt came from a source considerably less noble. One of Frieza's mid-tier commanders, a reptilian being named Gourd from the Ginyu Force's outer support units, who had survived the initial engagement by the specific strategy of not being anywhere near the actual fighting, had been watching Naruto through a long-range scanner since his arrival. Gourd had a gift for recognizing useful variables and an entrepreneurial spirit that had kept him alive through several regime changes. He approached under a flag of something that was not quite truce and made Naruto an offer that involved resources, transport off the planet, and a position in Frieza's organization that would be described, he explained, as technical advisor on unusual energy systems. Naruto stared at him for a long moment. "Is this guy one of the bad guys?" he asked Krillin, who had been trailing him at a discreet distance since the Namekian elder conversation. "Very much yes," Krillin confirmed. "Okay," Naruto said and turned back to Gourd. "So I'm going to say no to all of that. But I want to be clear that I'm saying no specifically to working with someone who's been destroying villages full of families, not because of any of the other stuff. The pay is probably fine." Gerd, who had not survived this long by failing to read rooms, decided that this particular asset was not going to be acquired through conventional means and retreated to file a different kind of report. The third attempt was Vegeta's, and it was the most honest of the three, which made it the most interesting. He didn't frame it as recruitment. He didn't offer anything. He walked up to Naruto while Naruto was eating. Bulma had produced something from her capsule pantry that was not ramen but was protein-rich and warm, and which Naruto was consuming with the focused appreciation of someone who had skipped several meals, and sat across from him and said, "I want to understand what you are." Naruto looked at him over his food. "You could just ask. That is what I'm doing." "You said you want to understand what I am. You could ask who I am instead. It's different." Vegeta's expression did something subtle and complicated. He was not accustomed to being corrected on semantics. He was even less accustomed to finding the correction valid. "Fine, who are you?" And so Naruto told him. "Not everything. There were things you didn't explain to people you'd known for 2 hours, things that needed context and trust that hadn't been built yet. But the outline, the village. The mission, what a ninja was, what the tailed beasts were, what it meant to be a Jinchuriki, a vessel for a power that was not entirely your own, that you had learned to live with and eventually learned to call something closer to a partner." He explained Kurama with the particular careful precision of someone describing a relationship that most people had got wrong for most of his life. Vegeta listened to all of it without expression. When Naruto finished, there was a pause. "You contain something," Vegeta said, "that could kill you from the inside." "Could have," Naruto said, "doesn't anymore. You consider that resolved. I consider it a partnership." Another pause longer. "You're either very strong or very naive. People keep thinking those are different things," Naruto said and went back to his food. Vegeta stood, looked at him for one more calculating second and walked away. He did not recruit him. He did not threaten him. He filed away every word and carried it somewhere private to examine at length. It was Gohan who became the bridge. This was perhaps also predictable. Gohan occupied a specific position in the Z-Fighters world, too young to be fully at ease with the weight of everything he'd already survived, too experienced to pretend that innocence was available to him anymore, possessing a gentleness that his upbringing had preserved against considerable pressure. He was the member of this group who still asked why, who still needed the world to make a certain kind of moral sense, who had not yet made peace with the idea that sometimes it didn't. He found Naruto after the Vegeta conversation, drawn by the same instinct that had made him study the whisker marks and the complex eyes, and they ended up walking along the edge of the inland sea together in the amber going to gold of Namek's long, slow evening. "You doing okay?" Gohan asked. He asked it the way his mother had taught him to ask, genuinely, not as a social formality. "Honestly, I've been worse." Naruto kicked a pebble into the alien water and watched it skip twice before sinking. "I'm worried about the people I left behind. In the middle of a fight, that's the part that bothers me. Not being here, I can deal with here. But someone I care about was in danger and I got pulled away and I don't know if they're..." He stopped, reset. "I'm working on not spiraling about that. Someone important, yeah." A pause. "My best friend, also my most complicated problem, both at once somehow." He glanced at Gohan. "You get that?" Gohan thought about his father. About what it was to love someone who was also in specific ways completely impossible. Yeah, he said, I get that. They walked in silence for a moment, which was the comfortable kind. Your dad, Naruto said eventually. Goku, he's the strong one, right? The one everyone's counting on. Yeah, he got hurt. Almost died, actually. Gohan said it matter-of-factly, the way you said things that had become familiar through repetition. He's recovering. He'll make it in time. He always does. How do you know? Gohan considered the question. It was one he'd asked himself in darker moments with less certainty than he showed. Because he always has, he said finally, which isn't really an answer, but it's the true one. Naruto nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, I understand that kind of faith. Above them, the three suns had arranged themselves into the configuration that Namek called dusk, and the sky had gone from amber to something deeper and stranger, a purple-orange that had no name in any language either of them knew. The inland sea moved in long, slow breathing rhythms. Somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable pressure of Frieza's flagship held its patient, terrible position. Hey, Naruto said, can I ask you something? Sure. That guy, Frieza. Gohan, how bad is he? Gohan was quiet for a moment. He had learned in his short and complicated life that there were different ways to answer questions about Frieza. The tactical answer, the emotional answer, the true answer. He chose the true one. He destroyed an entire planet for fun once, Gohan said, and he didn't remember doing it because it wasn't worth remembering. Naruto absorbed this. The whisker-marked face went still in a way it hadn't been since he arrived, not fright, not performing calm, but genuinely still. The stillness of someone taking something into themselves and letting it settle into the place where it would change how they moved through the world. Okay, he said very quietly. Inside him, behind sealed bars that were open just enough, Kurama's vast presence rippled once. Agreement. Recognition. The shared understanding of two beings who had learned, through hard and separate roads, that some things could not be allowed, not here. Not again. Somewhere in the planet's upper atmosphere, a scanning array recorded a brief spike in the anomalous energy signature, and transmitted the data to a ship where a being in elegant armor sat reviewing it with the slow, patient attention of someone who never rushed anything he intended to do thoroughly. Frieza set the report down and gazed at the planet below. Interesting, he said to the stars. Morning of Namek's 14th hour. The planet's days ran long, its triple suns trading off in shifts that stretched what should have been daylight into something closer to permanent amber twilight. Began with Vegeta doing something that surprised everyone, including himself. He asked Naruto to demonstrate his abilities, not as a threat assessment, not as a recruitment evaluation. He framed it in the clipped, non-negotiable vocabulary he used for everything, as an intelligence-gathering exercise. Frieza's forces were still on the planet. The Dragon Balls were still in play. Every variable on the board needed to be understood. That was all. Naruto, who had spent enough time around people who said one thing and meant three others to recognize the pattern, agreed without pressing the point. They found a flat stretch of terrain half a kilometer from the capsule house, scorched already by some earlier exchange. The coral grass burned away to bare gray rock that wouldn't miss a few more craters. Gohan came because Gohan went where things were going to be interesting and he'd stopped pretending otherwise. Krillin came because Krillin had the self-awareness to know that "I'll stay here" was a sentence that always preceded something he wished he'd witnessed. Bulma set up a portable sensor array on a folding table 20 meters back and told everyone not to destroy her equipment, which was either optimistic or a test of their character. Piccolo arrived last, without announcing himself, and stood at the edge of the gathering with his arms crossed and his expression doing what Piccolo's expression always did, communicating deep engagement through total apparent disengagement. Naruto stood in the center of the scorched plain and looked around at his audience with the mild self-consciousness of someone who did not actually mind performing, but felt it was polite to acknowledge the dynamic. Then he rolled his neck once, shook out his hands and said, "Okay, I'll start simple and work up. Stop me if something breaks." He made a hand seal ram, both hands coming together in a configuration that none of the assembled fighters recognized as having any Kai gathering function, because it wasn't Kai gathering, it was chakra focusing, and the distinction was one they were about to have explained to them in the most direct possible terms: clone jutsu. Explosion of energy was not large by Dragon Ball standards. It didn't crater the ground or create a shockwave that flattened the landscape. What it did was something that made every Kai-sensitive person present take an involuntary step backward, not from force but from sheer categorical wrongness. The sensation of energy splitting and replicating in a way that violated something fundamental about how power was supposed to behave. Where one Naruto had stood, 100 stood. They were not illusions. Bulma's sensors screamed this fact before she'd consciously processed what she was seeing, each copy registering as a distinct energy signature, each one carrying a fractional portion of the original's power but fully physically real. 100 identical blonde shinobi in orange jumpsuits, each one looking around with independent curiosity, each one technically capable of independent thought and combat, each one drawing on a shared chakra reserve that was, even divided 100-fold, sufficient to make Krillin's back-of-napkin threat assessment considerably more complicated. "What?" said Vegeta. It was the same word he'd used when Naruto arrived. The tone was different this time. Less demand for explanation, more genuine processing delay. "Shadow clones," Naruto said, all 100 of him said in a ragged unison that quickly desynchronized as each clone developed its own momentary individuality. "They're real, they can fight, they can use jutsu, they retain experience. When they dispel, I get their memories back." He paused. "It's a really useful technique." "You divided your energy," Piccolo said from the edge of the group. His voice was flat and analytical and completely failed to conceal the fact that what he'd just witnessed had deeply interested him. "Into 100 separate entities. Yeah, each of them is fully functional, yeah." Piccolo was quiet for a moment. "That should not be physically possible," he said finally, which from Piccolo was essentially a standing ovation. Naruto dismissed the clones with a single hand seal, and the energy of their dissolution washed back over him in a wave, 100 sets of perception and experience and reaction integrating back into one body in an instant, the kind of information processing that should have been overwhelming and which he handled with the casual ease of long practice. He blinked twice, adjusted his footing, and continued. The Rasengan came next. He formed it slowly, deliberately, holding it at half completion so they could see the process. The chakra rotating in 3 simultaneous axes, the compression building at his palm, the sphere of concentrated rotating force taking shape without any seal, without any spoken word, controlled entirely through will and precision. Even at demonstration power, it made the air around his hand blur with pressure, and emitted a high, continuous whine that set Bulma's sensors into a reporting frenzy. "That's a physical-type technique," Naruto explained. "Pure rotating chakra compression. It doesn't have elemental properties on its own, but when you combine it with nature transformation, adding wind, for example, you get this." He formed the Rasen Shuriken with both hands, the wind-natured expansion spreading outward from the sphere in a 4-pointed pattern that crackled and sang with compressed elemental force, and even at a fraction of its combat yield, the technique's presence was something that made the air feel dangerous. Every blade of the remaining coral grass within 15 meters flattened away from it like the world was politely trying to create distance. Vegeta watched this with the expression of a man updating a significant number of calculations simultaneously. "Cellular disruption properties alone," Bulma muttered at her table, stylus moving rapidly across her datapad, "would be this is operating on a completely different mechanical basis than Kai. The rotational force combined with the elemental nature transformation is..." She stopped herself. "This is the most interesting thing I have ever scanned, and I have scanned a Saiyan transformation." "You do more?" Vegeta asked. The question emerged stripped of its usual contempt, which was, from Vegeta, the equivalent of genuine enthusiasm. Naruto let the Rasen Shuriken dissipate, shaking the residual chakra from his fingers, and considered the assembled group. He made a decision, the same kind of decision he'd learned to make in the field, weighing trust against strategy, against what felt right. He had learned to trust his instincts about people, even in unfamiliar places. Because his instincts had been forged in circumstances considerably less forgiving than this. "Show you sage mode," he said, "but I want to explain something first." He sat down cross-legged on the scorched rock, which was not what anyone had expected, and looked up at them with an expression that was completely serious. Back home, there are nine-tailed beasts, giant chakra entities basically living natural disasters with personalities. Each one was sealed inside a human host to control and distribute their power. I'm the host of the Nine Tails. His name is Kurama. Silence that followed had texture. Inside you, Piccolo said, in a seal on my stomach, yeah. This Kurama, Piccolo continued in the tone of someone very carefully mapping the edges of a concept, is currently aware, present, listening to this conversation. Naruto's mouth curved slightly. He says he finds the architecture of this universe philosophically offensive, which I think means he's interested. Krillin made a sound that was technically not words. Power I've been showing you is my own, Naruto continued. Chakra I've developed through training. Kurama's power is separate, larger, wilder, and we use it together now rather than me trying to suppress it or him trying to break free. He paused. It took a while to get there, but we got there. What does that look like? Gohan asked. His voice was very careful, in the way that Gohan's voice got careful when he was thinking about his own relationship with enormous power, the great ape transformation he'd never fully controlled, the possibility of a Super Saiyan form he hadn't yet reached. He was asking for personal reasons, and both he and Naruto understood this without either of them saying it. Later, Naruto said, I don't want to break Bulma's sensors all at once. Bulma, from behind her table, made a noise suggesting she appreciated the consideration while simultaneously resenting the implication that her sensors had limits. It was Piccolo who identified the first real problem. He came to Naruto 2 hours later alone, moving with the deliberate quiet of a being who had once been an extension of the most powerful evil entity on Earth, and had spent considerable time since then figuring out what he was instead. He sat across from Naruto with the particular directness of someone who had no patience for preamble. Your energy, Piccolo said. The technique you call Sage Mode, the one that draws on natural energy. What about it? Namek's natural energy is not like Earth's. Naruto waited. Namekian, Piccolo said. I can feel the energy of this planet in a way others can't. Its natural energy has a different quality. The planet is older than Earth. The energy has been accumulating differently. If you attempt to draw on it for your sage techniques without adapting to its frequency, you will not be pulling in neutral energy. He paused, choosing his words with precision. You'll be pulling in energy that has been contaminated by Frieza's presence, by the deaths here, by months of violence done to a living world. Naruto went still. That doesn't mean you can't use it, Piccolo continued. It means you need to be careful. Sages who absorb impure natural energy lose themselves, Naruto said quietly. Yeah, I know. He looked at his hands. If I can't use Sage Mode reliably, I lose my best long-range sensing and my highest output techniques. A beat. That's a real problem, Piccolo said. It is. They sat with that for a moment, the honest acknowledgement of a genuine limitation, not the artificial nerfing of a universe that didn't know how to handle him, but a real, logical consequence of dimensional physics that had the courtesy to make complete sense. Can you help me calibrate? Naruto asked. Piccolo looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the question, the directness of it, the lack of ego, the simple assumption that if someone had relevant knowledge you asked them to share it rather than pretending you didn't need it, that reminded him of teaching Gohan. Of what it felt like to be asked for help by someone who genuinely wanted to learn rather than someone performing the social ritual of asking. Yes, Piccolo said, I can help you calibrate. The political fracture happened at midday. It was, in retrospect, inevitable. The Z-Fighters were not a monolithic bloc with unified strategic objectives. They were a collection of individuals with different information, different priorities, and different fundamental assumptions about how to handle a problem, operating in a high-stakes environment with incomplete data and approximately zero margin for error. The arrival of Naruto had added a new variable to an already overloaded equation, and equations under stress tended to crack along their pre-existing fault lines. Vegeta's position was pragmatic to the point of coldness. The newcomer was a significant power variable. His abilities were unique and partially unmeasured, and his loyalties were unverified. He should be given the minimum necessary information and observed rather than integrated until his usefulness and reliability were confirmed. He said this in front of Naruto, which was either a mark of disrespect or a mark of the specific Saiyan honesty that didn't bother with the social performance of saying things behind people's backs. Naruto, to his credit, didn't seem offended. He seemed like someone who had heard more insulting assessments of his trustworthiness and found this one boringly reasonable. Goku's position was its exact opposite and was delivered with the cheerful immovability of someone who had never once been argued out of trusting his instincts about people. He felt good to him. His energy was good. He'd helped the Namekian villages this morning without being asked. That was enough. You can't run a military operation on vibes, Vegeta said. You can't run anything worth running without them, Goku replied, which was the kind of statement that shouldn't have been an argument ender but somehow was because it had the particular quality of things that were simply true. Piccolo characteristically cut through both positions with surgical precision. He's already helped us. He's shown us his abilities openly. He has a genuine limitation that makes him more vulnerable, not less controllable, and he disclosed it voluntarily. The question isn't whether to trust him. The question is whether to tell him what we're actually planning to do with the Dragon Balls, because that's what this conversation is really about. Silence that followed confirmed that Piccolo had once again identified the actual conversation beneath the conversation everyone was having. Naruto looked between them. What are you planning to do with the Dragon Balls? Another silence. Bring back everyone Frieza killed, Krillin said quietly. All the Namekians. All of them. Naruto absorbed this. Dragon Balls can do that. Bring people back from the dead. One wish each, Bulma said from behind her sensor array. We need all 7. Frieza wants them too for immortality. If he gets them first, he never dies, Naruto finished. An immortal Frieza, Gohan said softly, who already destroyed a planet because he was bored. Scenario arranged itself in Naruto's mind with the clean, terrible clarity of a tactical assessment. He had trained under people who understood existential stakes, Jiraiya, who had died knowing what he was dying for, Minato, who had sealed a massive chakra entity into his own infant son because there was no other way, Nagato, who had broken himself against the world's cruelty and made it everyone else's problem. He understood what it meant when a single wrong outcome poisoned every possible future. Okay, he said, then we make sure he doesn't get them first. He looked at each of them in turn, Goku with his open warmth, Gohan with his careful intensity, Vegeta with his compressed calculation, Piccolo with his precise assessment, Krillin with his determined survival instinct, Bulma with her brilliant impatience. A team. Not his team, not yet, but a team of people who were each in their own way, trying to do the right thing in a situation that kept making the right thing harder to find. He knew this kind of team. Built one from scratch once in a village that hadn't wanted him. What do you need me to do? He asked. Frieza received the full analysis report at the 14th hour. In the comfortable chair he kept at the observation window of his personal chamber, a glass of something cold and pale in one elegant hand. He read it with the attention he gave everything he considered potentially significant, complete, unhurried, without the impatience that lesser beings allowed themselves. The anomalous energy being. The two-component power signature. The large secondary entity contained the failed scouter readings, the technique that had produced 100 physical duplicates, the rotating compression sphere, the elemental expansion variant, the third technique unactivated, apparently requiring environmental calibration. He set the report down on the arm of his chair. Zarbin, he said, my lord, the newcomer, has anyone managed to acquire a stable reading? No, my lord. Every scouter that approaches a scanning threshold fails before completion. Lady Bulma's sensors appear to be the most sophisticated instrumentation on the planet's surface, and from what we can observe, even her readings are inconclusive. Frieza smiled. It was a pleasant smile in the way that certain architectural features of dangerous buildings were pleasant. Inconclusive, he repeated, tasting the word. How rare, how genuinely rare that is at this point in my life. He looked back out at the planet. He has a partner, something old living inside him, something that has learned to cooperate with its host rather than simply fighting for control. Zarbin waited. That's the interesting part, Frieza continued almost to himself. Not the techniques. Techniques can be cataloged, countered, overwhelmed with sufficient force. It's the relationship that's interesting. What does it mean when a vessel and its contents become something genuinely new? What does that new thing become capable of? He stood, setting down his glass with the precision of someone who never made careless movements. I want him, Frieza said simply. Not as a soldier, as a subject of study initially. And then he paused, seemed to consider several sentences before selecting one. And then we'll see what he becomes with proper cultivation. He turned from the window, prepare a diplomatic approach, something subtle. I want him brought to me before the Saiyans have fully integrated him into their plans. And Zarbin, his voice carried the particular lightness that those who knew him well recognized as its most dangerous register. Do not harm him. I want him curious, not frightened. Frightened things make poor subjects. Curious things are so much more cooperative. Zarbin bowed and went to prepare something subtle. Below, on the surface of Namek, in the ember going to gold of another long, strange evening, Naruto and Gohan sat across from each other on a flat rock, and Naruto was teaching him the hand seal for the basic chakra sensing technique, walking him through it with the patient, careful attention of someone who had once been the worst student at the academy, and had therefore learned exactly which parts of teaching mattered and which parts were just teachers performing competence. Gohan's hands moved into the seal. He concentrated, he frowned, he concentrated harder. Push, Naruto said. You're a Kai user, so you're used to projecting outward. This is more like listening. Like instead of sending your energy out, you're just making yourself very quiet and letting what's already there come to you. Gohan tried again. This time something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no visible manifestation, no power surge, no shift in the air. But Gohan's eyes went slightly unfocused, the particular unfocus of attention turning inward and expanding simultaneously. And for 3 seconds he felt the planet the way Naruto felt the planet, the weight of its living energy, the locations of its beings mapped in a kind of spatial awareness that was completely distinct from Kai sensing, more environmental, more intimate, more like being part of something than like scanning it. Then it slipped away and he was just Gohan again, sitting on a rock. I felt it, he said, with a kind of wonder that he usually kept very carefully contained. Naruto grinned. It was his real grin, the full one, the one without any performance in it, the expression of someone who had discovered early that sharing what you knew was one of the few things that got bigger instead of smaller when you gave it away. Yeah, he said, you're going to be really good at that. Kurama, behind his open bars, made no sound. But the warmth that moved through Naruto's chest in that moment was not entirely his own, and both of them knew it, and neither of them felt the need to say so. In the middle distance, where Namek's inland sea caught the last light of the rotating suns, something broke the surface briefly, some native creature, large and unhurried, alive in its own world with complete indifference to the wars being fought above it, and then slipped back under, leaving only rings. The attack came at the 3rd hour of Namek's long night, not from Frieza directly. Frieza did not do things directly when indirection was available, and indirection was almost always available to someone with his resources and his patience. It came instead from the Ginyu Force, which was either a tactical decision or a performance, and with the Ginyu Force the distinction was largely academic. They arrived the way they always arrived, with choreography that suggested a profound investment in being witnessed, energy signatures blazing across the night sky like theatrical comets, each member descending in a carefully spaced formation that maximized visual impact. Jace and Berter took the flanks. Recruitment came down center with the slow, heavy confidence of a being who had never once in his life felt the need to hurry. Goldo materialized near the edge of the group with his 4 eyes scanning the assembled opposition with professional assessment. Captain Ginyu himself landed last because the captain always landed last, one fist raised toward the triple moon sky in the opening pose of a routine that had not changed in 15 years of successful deployment. Ginyu Force, Ginyu announced to the night, has arrived. Naruto, who had been in the middle of a chakra calibration exercise with Piccolo when the energy signatures appeared on his sensing range, stood at the edge of the gathering and looked at the 5 warriors with the careful, unhurried attention of someone taking inventory. He could feel them clearly now. Namek's contaminated natural energy had made Sage Mode unreliable, but his base-level chakra sensing was unaffected, and what he felt from the assembled Ginyu Force was considerable. Not incomprehensible, not in the territory of what he'd touched when he brushed against Frieza's signature from a distance, but considerable and distributed across 5 individuals with different energy profiles and presumably different combat approaches. "Are these guys serious?" he asked Gohan quietly. "Dangerous," Gohan said, equally quiet. "Recoome nearly killed me. Berter and Jace are fast and coordinated. Guldo has a technique that stops time or something close to it." "And Ginyu?" He paused. "Ginyu is the one to watch." "Time stop," Naruto repeated, filing this information in the part of his mind that handled tactical complications. "Sort of. He stops everyone else. He can still move." Naruto looked at Guldo specifically. The four-eyed member of the Force was compact, unremarkable in the physical sense, carrying the energy signature of someone who was significantly less powerful than his teammates, but who had the specific quality of someone who knew exactly how to make that gap irrelevant. Naruto had known fighters like that. He had been a fighter like that once before the gap between him and others closed. Those were often the most dangerous ones. "I'll take Guldo," he said. Gohan looked at him. "You don't have to. I have the best counter for a time-stop technique," Naruto said simply. "Shadow clones operate on independent chakra allocations. When he stops time, he's stopping external movement. But if the clones are already in motion when he activates it," Piccolo, who had been standing 3 meters away and had clearly been listening to everything, made a sound that was the closest he came to an expression of approval. "The clones' movement would continue from the moment before the stop. Their trajectories were already set." "Exactly." Naruto rolled his shoulders. "I need someone on Recoome, someone big." "Handle Recoome," said a voice from directly behind him. Vegeta landed between the group and the Ginyu Force with the complete assurance of someone arriving precisely on their own schedule, arms still crossed, the night wind moving through his widow's peak with entirely unearned dignity. He looked at the Force with the specific contempt of someone who had once been ranked below them in a hierarchy he had since rendered obsolete, and the Force looked back with the professional assessment of opponents they had fought before. "Prince Vegeta," Ginyu said with theatrical warmth. "How wonderful. Lord Frieza suggested you might be present, and you've brought—" His eyes moved to Naruto, and something in his professional assessment sharpened slightly. "Something new." "He's with us," Goku said, arriving from the opposite direction, fully healed, fully present, the warm sun energy of him filling the area like something had switched a light on. His voice was easy and completely without performance. Goku did not do intimidation as a style. He did honesty at a volume that accomplished everything intimidation was supposed to. Ginyu looked at Goku for a long moment. His scouter ran a reading. His expression did something complicated. "Shall we?" he said. The knight moved first, because Guldo always moved first when he could, because his entire combat philosophy was built on the interval between the start and the moment his opponents understood what was happening. His technique activated with the familiar internal sensation of his dual hearts working in tandem, the psychic compression of his held breath extending outward in a bubble of stopped time that had ended the movement of beings far more powerful than him. He expected stillness. He got 3 shadow clones traveling at full speed on trajectories they had committed to 0.3 of a second before the time stop activated, their independent chakra systems carrying them forward through the frozen moment like ships whose engines had been set before the sea went calm. The first clone hit him from the left, the second from above. The third was the real Naruto, having replaced himself with a clone at the moment of the technique's activation using a substitution that operated on chakra displacement rather than physical movement, appearing behind Guldo with a Rasengan already formed and spinning. The contact lasted half a second. Guldo went through 15 meters of alien rock and stopped at the base of a coral formation, which cracked significantly and then fell on him, which Naruto noted was probably excessive but definitely thorough. He dispelled the clones and turned back to the wider battle, pulling the memory impressions of their brief seconds of existence, movement data, threat angles, environmental details, back into himself in the seamless integration of long practice. 4 remained. The fight with Recoome lasted longer. Not because Vegeta was losing, exactly, though not losing and winning were different things when Recoome was involved. Recoome was enormous, durable beyond what his energy signature suggested, and operating on the specific combat philosophy of someone who had never needed subtlety and had therefore never developed any. He hit things until they stopped moving. When they stopped moving, he hit them again to confirm. It was not elegant, but it had a very high success rate. Vegeta was fast and precise and fighting with the compressed fury of a man who had spent years subordinate to people he considered beneath him. He was landing hits. Each one mattered. The problem was that Recruitment's baseline endurance meant that hits which would have ended most fights at this level were simply being cataloged and set aside. Naruto arrived at the edge of this exchange, assessed it in 2 seconds, and made a decision. He said to Recruitment from 6 meters away. Recruitment turned. Fighters of his type always turned when addressed directly. It was an ego-based reflex that was, in this case, tactically expensive. Naruto hit him with a Rasengan at full combat output, no warning, no announcement, no technique name. Just the rotating compression sphere applied to Recruitment's exposed side with every kilogram of force Naruto's physical body could channel through his arm. The sound it made was significant. Recruitment moved sideways approximately 30 meters, tore through 2 coral formations, and came to rest in a new crater with an expression of genuine surprise that was the most authentic emotion he had displayed in the entire engagement. Vegeta stared at Naruto. "Welcome," Naruto said, and turned back toward the main engagement. "I did not need your help," Vegeta said to his back. "I know," Naruto said without turning around. "You were handling it." There was a pause. "Yes," Vegeta said, after a moment that lasted exactly as long as his pride required. "I was." He then hit Recruitment with a concentrated Kai blast that resolved the situation permanently because the help had already been given and there was no point pretending it hadn't changed the equation. Jace and Berter were a coordination problem. They had fought together for so long that their combat patterns had merged into something that transcended simple teamwork, a fluid reactive system where each member covered the other's angles automatically, where the speed of their combined assault compressed reaction windows to the point where even Kai sensitives struggled to track both simultaneously. Krillin and Goku were managing, but managing and winning were different postures, and the energy expenditure of the management was cumulative. Naruto flanked wide, outside the visual range of the engagement, and ran through the tactical problem with the focused attention his academy instructors had always said he didn't have. He had it. He had always had it. He had just never had it for things that didn't matter to him. This mattered. Berter was the speed element. Jace was the power element. The system worked because speed created opening pressure that power could exploit. Remove the speed and you had a power fighter without setup. Remove the power and speed became harassment without consequence. He needed to separate them. He made 40 shadow clones, arrayed them in a wide encircling pattern that took 4 seconds to deploy, and then triggered them all simultaneously from different approach vectors. Not to win, not to damage, to create enough simultaneous pressure points that coordination became mathematically difficult, that the system of 2 became 42 problems to solve at once rather than one manageable combined threat. Berter's speed was extraordinary. He dispatched clones with efficient violence, 20 gone in the first 5 seconds, the memory of each one's dispersal returning to Naruto in clean data packets. But 20 was 20, and 20 required attention, and attention directed at 20 clones from the encircling pattern was attention not directed at the angular attack. Naruto himself was running from the northeast with a wind-natured Rasen Shuriken at 3/4 output. He didn't aim for Berter. He aimed for the space between Berter and Jace, at the precise interval where their coordination system required them to be in proximity, and detonated the technique's wind expansion properties at contact with the ground rather than with either fighter, producing a concussive dispersal that was less about damage and more about displacement. They separated. Goku, who had been watching this with the expression of someone watching someone else solve a puzzle in an unexpected way, moved immediately. Because Goku always moved immediately when a gap appeared, it was possibly his most consistent quality, and the rest resolved in the space of 20 seconds with the combined efforts of someone who could tell which opening mattered, and someone who could guarantee that the opening lasted long enough to use. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't the clean, overwhelming dominance of someone operating several tiers above their opposition. It was tactical, collaborative, and earned, which meant it was, in the vocabulary of the Z-fighters, exactly what a good fight was supposed to be. Ginyu waited until the others were down before engaging, which was the move of someone who was either very patient or very calculating, and Ginyu was both. He had been watching Naruto since the battle's first second. Watching with specific attention, the way a technician watched a new type of machine, not for overall function but for the mechanisms, the particular hand configurations, the energy splits, the tactical architecture of the shadow clone deployment. He was cataloging, and the catalog was detailed and purposeful in a way that Naruto, pulling information back from dispersed clones, gradually began to understand. "Not here to win," Naruto said, when Ginyu finally descended to the ground level and stood 10 meters away from him in the aftermath of the wider engagement. Around them, Goku and Vegeta and Krillin were managing their respective situations, but none of them were close enough to intercept quickly. Ginyu smiled. It was a professional smile. Lord Frieza was very specific about what he wanted from this engagement. "Information," Naruto said. "Understanding," Ginyu corrected. "There's a difference. Information is data. Understanding is knowing how something works well enough to use it." He tilted his head. "Your body switching technique is not available to you because you are not me, and I am not explaining further." He meant this as a reassurance. In context, it was something else. "Lord Frieza simply wants you to come and speak with him. He is genuinely curious. That is rarer than you might think." Naruto looked at him steadily. "And if I say no, then I report what I've observed and Lord Frieza makes different arrangements." Ginyu said this without particular menace. He was a professional. Menace was a tool for beings who lacked other tools. "But I'd encourage you not to say no. Curiosity in Lord Frieza is considerably safer than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Becoming a problem to be solved rather than a question to be answered." Behind Naruto, Kurama stirred. Not the gentle ripple of acknowledgement or the warm undercurrent of presence. This was something else, a shift in the quality of the sealed space. A change in the weight of what lived behind the bars, as if something very large had risen from very deep water and placed itself at the surface with absolute intentionality. Naruto felt it move through him from the inside out, felt the temperature change in his own chakra, felt the specific sensation of standing on ground that had just become considerably more solid. Kurama was not speaking. He was not pressing against the seal. He was simply making himself known to Naruto, and Naruto understood to Ginyu, whose expression had changed with the particular quality of someone whose professional assessment had just encountered new data. "That," Ginyu said carefully, "is not a Kai signature." Naruto agreed. "It's not." Silence between them had a different texture now, not the silence of negotiation, the silence of recalibration. "Not coming to meet Frieza," Naruto said. "Not because I'm afraid of him. Because I know what he is, and I know what he does to people who are less powerful than him, and the answer to someone like that isn't a conversation. I've tried conversations with people like that." Something moved through his face, the residue of things he had survived rather than simply experienced. "They have to be changed, completely, and not everyone can be changed." He paused. "I don't know yet which one Frieza is." Looked at him for a long moment. "You're very young," he said finally. It was not surprisingly a dismissal. It sounded almost like an observation about something impressive. "Yeah," Naruto said. "People keep being surprised by that." Turned and rose into the sky at combat speed. The professional who had completed his assignment, gathered his understanding, delivered his message, returned with his data without any particular feeling about the outcome. He was a soldier. The outcome was Frieza's department. Naruto watched him go. "He's going to tell Frieza everything," Krillin said, appearing at his shoulder with the specific expression of someone who had survived enough close calls to find the aftermath of danger almost relaxing by comparison. "Yeah," Naruto said. "And Frieza's going to come himself," Naruto said. "Eventually, when he decides the situation is worth his personal attention." He looked at the sky where Ginyu had disappeared. "Which means we need to move faster on the Dragon Balls." Bulma said from somewhere behind them both. Already working, it was Gohan who found him afterward, in the same spot by the inland sea where they had talked the night before. Naruto was sitting at the water's edge, not meditating, not training, just sitting, the specific sitting of someone processing something that needed to be felt rather than solved. Gohan sat next to him without asking. They were quiet for a while. The sea moved in its slow breathing rhythms. The triple moon's Namek had 3 moons as well. Of course it did cast overlapping silver shadows across the water. "You did something in the fight," Gohan said eventually. "When you were facing Ginyu, something changed." "Kurama," Naruto said. "He came forward." "Not forward exactly, he just let himself be felt from the outside." Naruto looked at his hands. He doesn't do that often, he's private in his own way. Coming to the surface like that, letting someone else sense him, that's him saying something. What's he saying? Naruto was quiet for a moment. That he's paying attention, he said. That he's decided this matters. He looked at the water. When Kurama decides something matters, things get heavier, more real. He's been alive for centuries. Most things don't impress him anymore. A pause. Frieza impresses him, not in a good way. Gohan nodded slowly. He understood the weight of that, the specific gravity of a centuries-old entity that had seen everything, deciding that something new was worth its serious attention. He thought about the androids, about Cell, about threats that his father had described in terms of what they meant for the future rather than just the present moment. Naruto, he said carefully, what happens if we can't get to the Dragon Balls in time? What happens if Frieza actually? Then we stop him anyway, Naruto said, not with bravado, with the flat, certain quality of someone who had made a decision so complete that uncertainty about it had simply stopped being available as an option. Without the Dragon Balls, some other way, we figure it out. You sound like my dad, Gohan said. Your dad sounds like someone worth sounding like. Gohan looked at him, this strange dimensional traveler in his orange jumpsuit, whisker marks silvered by the triple moonlight, carrying something ancient inside him that had just decided to stand up, sitting by an alien sea on a planet he'd never heard of 2 days ago, and felt something settle in his chest that had been moving around loose for longer than he'd admitted. They were not going to lose this one. He didn't know how he knew. He knew it the way he knew his father would recover. The way he knew that some things were simply true before the evidence arrived to confirm them. We should get some sleep, Gohan said. Yeah, Naruto agreed. He didn't move immediately. Neither did Gohan. They sat for another few minutes in the comfortable silence of people who had decided, without any formal agreement, to trust each other completely. Above them, on the underside of a cloud caught in triple moonlight, a shadow moved that was not a cloud's shadow. Something scanning, patient, systematic, covering a grid pattern at high altitude with the methodical attention of someone conducting a very thorough survey. It paused over their position for 3 seconds. Then it moved on, and the night was just a night again, and the sea breathed in its slow rhythms, and 2 boys sat at its edge, not quite ready to go inside yet, carrying between them the specific weight of a world that needed them to be ready for what came next. In a ship high above, Frieza closed the scanning report and set it aside. Tomorrow, he said softly to no one. I think tomorrow will do nicely. Frieza came at dawn. Not metaphorical dawn. Namek's triple suns had no single dramatic sunrise. But there was a moment in the planet's long rotation when all 3 aligned along the same horizon axis, and the sky went from the deep purple of its night phase to something that could only be described as the color of a warning. Gold and red and amber layering over each other in slow, massive strokes, as if the planet itself was trying to communicate something important to anyone willing to read it. Frieza descended through that sky like punctuation. He came alone, which was either confidence or theater or both, and with him came a quality of presence that was simply different from anything Naruto had experienced in his 2 days on Namek. Not louder, not larger in the way tailed beasts were large, not explosive in the way Vegeta's compressed power was explosive. It was cold and absolute and extraordinarily patient, the presence of something that had been the most dangerous thing in every room it had ever entered for so long that it had stopped noticing it was doing it. A fact of nature, a law rather than a force. Naruto felt it from 2 kilometers away and stood up from his sleeping mat before the feeling finished arriving. Kurama was already awake. The others scrambled to position in the organized chaos of a group that had developed combat protocols through repeated near-death experiences rather than formal training. Goku at the front. Because Goku was always at the front, not because he'd been assigned there, but because he moved toward things. Vegeta flanking, calculating, already running power comparisons in the precise mental architecture he maintained for existential threats. Piccolo finding elevation. Gohan staying close to Naruto in the specific way of someone who had made a private decision about where they were going to be when things became serious. Krillin moved to protect Bulma. Bulma, already at her sensor array, was recording everything. Frieza landed 40 meters away in the scorch plane they had used for demonstrations 2 days earlier, which felt like either coincidence or a statement, and looked at the assembled group with the pleasant expression of someone who had arrived at a social engagement they were genuinely looking forward to. His gaze found Naruto immediately. "There you are," he said. The warmth in his voice was technical, deployed with perfect precision, calibrated to produce a specific effect, as genuine as a tool is genuine when it performs its function. "I've been looking forward to this. Proper introductions without intermediaries. I'm Frieza." "I know who you are," Naruto said. "Of course you do. And I know a great deal about you, Naruto Uzumaki, 7th Hokage, or you will be, I understand, when you return home. If you return home." The correction was gentle. The implication was a blade. Village hidden in the leaves, Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, a boy who turned the most feared entity in his world into a partner through sheer force of personality. He smiled. "I find that genuinely admirable. Most beings in your position simply die." Assembled Z-fighters felt the specific tension of a room where the most dangerous person present was being polite, and everyone understood that the politeness was the most dangerous thing in the room. "What do you want?" Naruto asked, not rudely, simply, "To make you an offer," Frieza said, "before things become unpleasant, because they will become unpleasant and I genuinely prefer they didn't. I find destruction tedious when there are more interesting alternatives." He tilted his head with the precise bird-like attention of someone taking in every detail simultaneously. "Come with me, voluntarily. I have resources, technology, scientific minds that would find what you carry endlessly fascinating. I'm not offering servitude, I'm offering study. Partnership even of a kind. You would be the most singular being in my empire. That is not a small thing." "Everyone else," Naruto said, "irrelevant to the offer. Then it's not an offer." Frieza's expression didn't change in any way that could be pointed to and identified as change, but something shifted in the atmosphere with the quality of a pressure system moving in. "I was afraid you'd say something like that," he said with genuine-sounding regret. "You have the instincts of a protector, admirable as I said, also tremendously inconvenient." He looked past Naruto at Gohan briefly, then back. "Shall we dispense with the formalities?" "Yeah," said Goku from the front. "Let's." The opening exchange lasted 11 seconds and rearranged the geography of the surrounding area significantly. Frieza moved to his second form without preamble, not because he needed it for Goku's current level, but because the scan data from Ginyu's report had suggested that the standard first form created a credibility problem with this particular group, and Frieza had no interest in being underestimated and then forced to escalate reactively. He preferred to set the terms. The power increase was seismic. The ground cracked in a perfect circle from his position. The sky above him changed quality in the specific way that atmosphere changed near things that could breach it. Piccolo, floating at elevation, felt the wash of it and tightened his jaw to keep his expression neutral. Goku met it head-on because Goku met everything head-on, and the collision of their energies produced a shockwave that flattened the coral grass for 300 meters in every direction and rattled Bulma's sensor array hard enough that 2 of her instruments fell off the table. They moved at speeds that converted the space between them into a series of positions rather than a continuous path: contact, separation, repositioning, contact again, each exchange a complete tactical conversation conducted in fractions of seconds. Goku was fast, precise, operating at the edge of his recovered capacity with the particular intensity of someone whose baseline was prodigious and whose ceiling had not yet been located. Frieza was faster, not by an enormous margin, but by enough, and the enough was consistent and patient and completely without effort, which was the specific quality that made it so concerning. Not that Frieza was working hard against Goku, but that Goku was clearly Frieza's second concern, the one he was managing while his primary attention remained on other variables. The primary attention, Naruto understood, was on him. He felt it, the cold precision of it, tracking him even through the chaos of the exchange, adjusting Frieza's positional choices in ways that kept Naruto peripherally visible at all times. Frieza was fighting Goku and watching Naruto simultaneously, and the watching was not passive, it was measurement. He was waiting for Naruto to reveal something. Naruto turned to Gohan. He's not giving Goku everything, he said quietly under the noise of the exchange. I know, Gohan said. Your dad needs more, Gohan said. He needs more time, he's close, I can feel it, but... Then we buy it, Naruto said. He looked at Piccolo. Can you give me 30 seconds of his attention? Piccolo descended from elevation without a word, which was confirmation what happened next was not the plan Naruto had intended. He and Piccolo engaged Frieza together. The coordination between them rough but functional, Piccolo's Kai blasts creating cover for Naruto's close-range pressure. Naruto's shadow clones forcing multivector tracking that fragmented Frieza's attention across more targets than his patient calculation wanted to manage simultaneously. It worked better than it should have. Piccolo was Namekian, ancient and powerful and fighting for his planet. Naruto was a ninja, which meant he fought dirty in interesting ways and had a relationship with shadow clones that bordered on the artistic. Frieza handled them with the expression of someone solving a mildly complex equation. He caught Naruto on the third exchange, not a decisive blow, not an attempt to injure, but a precisely calibrated strike to his left side that was designed to interrupt chakra flow rather than cause structural damage. It was the move of someone who had, in the 2 minutes of direct observation, already mapped the approximate mechanics of how Naruto's power circulated and identified the most efficient point of disruption. Naruto went down on one knee. The pain was real. The interrupted chakra flow sent a cascade of feedback through his system that lit up every nerve in his left side, but what stopped him wasn't the pain. It was the cold realization, settling through him with absolute clarity, that Frieza had just demonstrated in a single move that he understood Naruto's power mechanics well enough to surgically disable them. In 5 minutes of observation, this was what Frieza was, not just power. Intelligence applied to power, patient and thorough and utterly without mercy. Gohan shouted his name and moved toward him. Frieza moved faster. He appeared between Naruto and Gohan with the instantaneous repositioning of someone for whom the space between 2 points was more suggestion than obstacle, and looked down at Naruto on the ground with an expression that was almost gentle, the specific gentleness of someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it. You see, he said, you can't protect everyone. You're strong, genuinely, unusually strong in ways I haven't finished categorizing, but you are not strong enough for this. Not yet, and not yet is a very dangerous place to be on this planet today. He raised his hand. Everything inside Naruto that was fear recognized this moment with complete honesty, not performed courage, not suppressed terror. The real thing looked at directly, named accurately. He was on one knee on an alien planet with interrupted chakra flow and the most dangerous being in this universe 3 meters away and his friends behind him, and a war that was not his to fight surrounding him on all sides. He looked at Frieza's raised hand. He looked past it at Gohan, who was frozen 2 meters away with an expression of controlled terror that was trying very hard to be controlled determination, and was managing it through sheer force of will. This 12-year-old boy who had grown up in the shadow of a father whose power was a kind of gravitational field and had been quietly, persistently, without complaint or bitterness, building something of his own. He looked at the sky, ember going to gold and Namek's warning dawn. He closed his eyes. Behind the bars that had long since become more door than barrier, Kurama said, without words, the thing he had been waiting for the right moment to say since the day Naruto fell through the dimensional rift onto this planet. It was not permission. Kurama had stopped operating in the vocabulary of permission years ago, had stopped thinking of himself as something Naruto permitted or restricted or managed. It was something more fundamental than permission. It was recognition, the acknowledgement between two beings who had grown into each other's shapes that they were in this moment, facing something that required both of them completely, not the nine tails pressing against a seal while a vessel struggled to contain it. Not a Jinchuriki borrowing power from an entity that resented the arrangement. Partners, full, actual partners, two forces that had learned through years of hard and honest work that they were stronger as one than either was alone. Naruto opened his eyes. The transformation was not like a Super Saiyan transformation. There was no pillar of light, no ground-fracturing power explosion, no signature dramatic escalation that announced itself in the visual language of power increases the Z-fighters were accustomed to reading. What happened was slower and more total than that, a change in quality rather than quantity, though the quantity increased enormously as well. The chakra shroud came first. Not the chaotic, painful, destructive red shroud of his early Jinchuriki states, not the incomplete versions he'd managed in his academy years. The full partnership mode, Kurama's chakra and his own weaving together into the golden cloak that covered his body from head to foot in a form that burned like concentrated sunlight and moved like something alive. 6 Magatama markings at his collar, the cloak's edges rippling and flowing without wind to move them, his eyes shifting to the vertical amber pupils of the 9 tails. Bulma's sensors, which had been struggling with every reading they'd attempted since his arrival, simultaneously gave up producing numbers and began simply registering the output in terms of what it was doing to the local environment. The chakra's interaction with Namek's atmosphere, the resonance between Kurama's ancient energy and the planet's own deep power, a frequency match that made the ground hum and the inland sea behind them rise in slow, concentric rings from a center point directly below Naruto's knees. Frieza's hand had not moved, but his expression had. For the first time since he had landed in Namek's warning dawn, Frieza looked at something with complete, unperformed attention. Not the calculated patience of someone managing variables, not the cold, pleasant mask of someone conducting business. Genuine attention, the rare, unguarded kind that came when something genuinely new appeared in front of a being who had seen everything. Extraordinary, he said very quietly. Naruto stood up. The chakra-interrupted flow repaired itself as Kurama's energy threaded through the affected pathways and restored them with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent years learning exactly how his partner's system worked. The pain in his left side receded. His senses expanded, not just the base-level chakra sensing he'd been operating on, but the full sage-enhanced environmental awareness, and Namek's contaminated natural energy that had been a limitation now fed directly into Kurama's ability to filter and process it. The ancient-tailed beast's centuries of experience with raw natural energy turning the planet's grief and violence into something workable, something usable, something that added to his reserves rather than corrupting them. The limitation was gone. Kurama, Naruto said aloud, which was not tactically necessary but felt important, felt like the kind of thing you said when you wanted everyone present, enemy included, to understand what they were dealing with. "You ready?" The answer came not as words but as the full-throated presence of something enormous and ancient settling into active partnership, the way a river settled into its proper channel, not contained but directed, not suppressed but purposed. He was ready. The fight that followed was not clean. Clean fights, Naruto had learned, were the ones where the power gap was so large that strategy became irrelevant. This was not that. Frieza in his second form was genuinely, catastrophically powerful, and Kurama's chakra mode brought Naruto into genuine contention rather than guaranteed victory, which meant the fight was real in the way that mattered, both sides working, both sides adapting, the outcome genuinely unresolved. Frieza escalated to his third form 6 minutes in, when it became clear that second form was not producing the conclusive advantage he wanted, and the increase was significant enough that Naruto felt it as a physical pressure, and responded by deepening the integration with Kurama, pulling more of the partnership's shared capacity into the cloak's output, until the golden shroud was burning hot enough to leave afterimages in the alien dawn. The exchanges were enormous. High blasts absorbed and responded to with tailed beast chakra arms. Frieza's speed matched by the shroud's enhancement of Naruto's already considerable reflexes. The shadow clone strategy evolved under combat conditions, clones wearing portions of the shroud, each one a fragment of the full partnership, coordinating on a level that Frieza's scouter-based analytical approach struggled to track because the clones' independent decision-making produced outcomes that resisted prediction. Vegeta joined the engagement at the 8-minute mark, not because he'd been asked but because Vegeta did not watch fights he could affect from the sideline. His contribution was tactically precise and entirely in character. He went after Frieza's positioning rather than his power, disrupting the spatial control that Frieza used to manage multiple opponents, forcing him to reconsider his geometry. Piccolo covered angles. Goku, behind them all, sat cross-legged on the scorched earth with his eyes closed, and his Kai gathering in a way that made the air around him shimmer. And Gohan stood guard over him with the focused, absolute attention of someone who had decided this was the most important thing they would ever do. It was Naruto who pushed Frieza to his fourth form, not through power alone. Through something Frieza had not anticipated and could not fully account for in his cold, efficient calculations, the way Naruto fought. Not the techniques themselves, not the power level, but the philosophy underneath it. Naruto did not fight to destroy, he fought to change. Every technique was aimed not just at winning the exchange, but at creating the conditions for a different outcome than the one the enemy was planning, disrupting certainty, introducing chaos into precision, making the calculated unpredictable. Frieza had fought being stronger than Naruto. He had never fought something that fought like this. The fourth form transformation was the real Frieza, elegant, compact. The enormous energy of the previous forms refined into something that needed less space because it had less waste. The cold increased, not temperature cold, but the cold of absolute capability, the sensation of being in the presence of something that had optimized itself for a single purpose over centuries. His power in fourth form was qualitatively different from his first three, not just larger but more precise, the way a scalpel was more precise than a hammer despite being smaller. The shockwave of his transformation knocked Naruto back 40 meters. He landed on his feet, the chakra shroud flaring to compensate, Kurama's presence deepening further in response to the increased threat, and looked across the scorched plain at the fourth form Frieza and felt with absolute honesty that this was at the edge of what he had not passed it. At it, which meant every choice from here had to count. He's holding back, Vegeta said, appearing at Naruto's shoulder, breathing hard, even now. There's something beyond this form. He reached it in time to matter? Naruto asked. Vegeta was quiet for half a second, which was the amount of time Vegeta allowed himself for admissions he found difficult. Kakarot, he said. It has to be Kakarot. Then we keep Frieza busy, Naruto said, for as long as we need to. He looked at Vegeta, this man who had arrived in his world as an enemy, who wore his pride like armor over everything he couldn't afford to examine, who had sat across from him and listened to a story about a tailed beast and a boy and a partnership built from mutual necessity and said nothing, but had filed it somewhere private and examined it at length. He saw in Vegeta's face the specific quality of someone who was about to do something they didn't have a framework for, not sacrifice. Vegeta understood sacrifice in the tactical sense. Something more like trust, the decision to fight beside someone rather than in parallel with them, which was different and more difficult and more real. Slow me down, Vegeta said. Never, Naruto said. They moved together. What saved them in the end was not power. It was exactly what Frieza had identified in Naruto as his essential quality and had failed, despite his intelligence and his centuries and his cold, perfect analysis, to fully account for. The protector's instinct, the compulsion to stand between the threat and the people behind him, the absolute refusal to let the thing he was guarding become the cost of winning. Frieza in his fourth form pushed through their combined opposition with the patient certainty of something that had never believed it could lose and had accrued an enormous amount of evidence in support of that belief. He was doing damage. Real damage. Vegeta was bleeding. Piccolo was down on one knee. Naruto's chakra shroud was flickering at the edges from the cumulative strain of maintaining full partnership mode against extended high-level opposition. He drove toward Gohan. Not because Gohan was the primary threat, because Gohan standing over Goku was the point of the formation, the center of its meaning, and Frieza had understood from Ginyu's report that Naruto's protector instinct would respond to a threat against the boy more completely than a threat against himself. That Naruto would spend everything he had to stop it. He was correct. Naruto appeared between Frieza and Gohan with the body flicker technique at maximum output. Not quite instant transmission, not the same mechanics, but fast enough that Frieza's extended hand found Naruto instead of Gohan, and the impact that followed was the most significant single-strike exchange of the entire engagement. Frieza's power, full and unheld, met Kurama's chakra at complete partnership depth, and what happened between them was not a clean collision of forces. It was a conversation, or more precisely, an argument between two fundamentally different kinds of power about which one was more real. Frieza's power was enormous, refined, absolute in its own terms. Kurama's chakra was ancient, older than Frieza's civilization, older than most of the political structures he'd conquered. It was the distilled natural energy of a world, given form and will, and then given, through a process that had taken years of genuine effort between two stubborn and complicated people, something that Frieza's power had never had to contend with before. Not just strength. Love was too simple a word. Loyalty was closer. The absolute non-negotiable quality of a bond between two beings who had chosen each other from the worst possible starting point and built something real from the rubble. Kurama had hated Naruto. Naruto had feared Kurama. They had been forced together by history and circumstance and the decisions of people neither of them had chosen, and from that foundation they had somehow, through the specific alchemy of two honest and stubborn natures refusing to stop trying, become partners. Against that, Frieza's fourth form power was a very big hammer, and Naruto was not a nail. The force of the impact pushed him back, 20 meters, 30, his heels dragging lines through alien rock, but he did not go down. The chakra shroud held. Kurama held. Naruto held at the end of his reserves, at the absolute edge of what the partnership could sustain, with his jaw set and his feet planted, and his eyes on Frieza with the specific quality of someone who had decided that this was the line and the line was here and nothing was moving it. Behind him, Gohan turned around. Behind Gohan, Goku opened his eyes. The golden light that erupted from Goku's position was not subtle. It was not any of the things that Naruto's power was: earthen, ancient, relational. It was pure, it was nuclear, it was the concentrated force of a Saiyan lineage finally finding the key that unlocked something it had been building toward for generations. The Super Saiyan transformation rewrote the power landscape of the battlefield in a single second, and Frieza, who had been advancing on Naruto's held line, stopped. For the first time in the engagement, Frieza stopped. Naruto looked back at Goku, golden-haired, blazing, the warm sun energy of him now a genuine sun, the kind of power that required new vocabulary, and let out a breath that carried with it every second of the last 40 minutes of sustained maximum output combat. Finally, Kurama said inside him, with the satisfaction of an ancient being whose patience had been validated. Naruto almost laughed. Goku looked at Frieza across the battlefield with the expression he always wore for serious opponents. Not hatred, not calculation, not the cold assessment of a tactician. Simple, total focus, the undivided attention of someone who intended to finish this completely. "You hurt my friends," Goku said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of the situation, from which a conclusion followed naturally. Frieza looked at the Super Saiyan transformation with the expression of someone encountering a prediction that had, against their careful analysis, turned out to be accurate. "Legend," he said. "How tedious!" The final engagement began. Naruto did not fight in the Super Saiyan exchange. He understood, with the tactical clarity of a shinobi who had learned when to act and when to hold position, that this was Goku's fight, that there were combats which had to be completed by specific people for reasons that were not purely about power levels, that the narrative weight of a conflict mattered as well as its physical outcome. That Goku and Frieza had been moving toward this point since before Naruto arrived on this planet, and that his role now was not to insert himself but to ensure that no other variable disrupted it. He held position between the exchange and the others, chakra shroud dimmed to minimum maintenance level to preserve what remained of his reserves, and guarded. Gohan came to stand beside him. They watched together, the Super Saiyan and the Emperor, the transformation that Frieza had spent decades preventing and the power that had spent those decades quietly becoming inevitable, the collision of everything that had been building since the first soldier landed on Namek and the first village burned. "Is your dad going to be okay?" Naruto asked. "Yes," Gohan said, simple, complete. "You sure?" Gohan watched his father move through the exchange with a grace that was inseparable from his power. The way Goku always fought, not like someone trying to win, but like someone who simply was winning, the outcome already decided by something deeper than technique. "Sure," Gohan said. Naruto nodded. He watched. He held position. He did the thing that had taken him longer to learn than anything else in his education. He trusted. Above them, Namek's three suns had finished their warning configuration, and the sky had moved past gold into the clear, sharp blue of a day that had decided to be ordinary despite everything. A wind came off the inland sea, carrying the alien salt smell of a world that had been through worse than this morning and had the geological record to prove it. Kurama settled in Naruto's chest like something that had found its position and was satisfied with it. The fight continued. Silence after Frieza fell was the kind that had weight, not the silence of absence. Namek was never fully quiet. Its winds and its seas, and the deep geological breath of its ancient rock creating a constant low register of sound that had underlain every moment of the last 2 days. This was the silence of aftermath, the specific hush that descended when something that had been consuming all available attention was suddenly, finally gone, and the world had not yet decided what to fill the space with. Goku stood in the scorched center of the battlefield, Super Saiyan form fading back into the familiar dark-haired ease of his resting state, and looked at where Frieza had been with the expression he always wore at the end of a serious fight, not triumph, not relief, something quieter and more complicated. The look of someone who understood the cost of what had just happened even when the outcome was the right one. Naruto sat down on the nearest flat rock and did not move for approximately 30 seconds. This was not weakness. This was the body's honest accounting, the bill presented after maximum output sustained combat, the chakra reserves that had been drawn down to their absolute floor and needed time to begin the climb back up. Kurama was quiet inside him, not absent but resting, the ancient energy settling back into its deeper currents after the hours of full partnership deployment. The golden shroud was gone. Naruto was just himself again, tired, marked with the physical evidence of the engagement. Sitting on alien rock on a planet he still didn't know how to get home from, he felt, despite all of this, remarkably okay. Gohan appeared beside him with 2 capsule-stored water containers that Bulma had deployed from her kit, with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who had learned that the immediate post-battle period required hydration before anything else. He handed one to Naruto without ceremony. Naruto took it with both hands, the way he'd been taught to receive things as a child by the third Hokage's wife during one of her occasional quiet acts of kindness toward the village's unwanted boy, and drank half of it in one pull. "How's your dad?" Naruto asked. "Tired," Gohan said. "Happy, injured in 7 places that he won't mention unless someone counts them for him." He paused. "Normal," Naruto's mouth curved. "He's something else." "Yeah," Gohan said, with the particular warmth of someone who had spent their whole life in the gravitational field of a person who was impossible to fully understand, and had given up trying to understand them and started simply appreciating them instead. "He really is." Krillin arrived with the energy of someone who had survived something they weren't certain they were going to survive, and was still slightly surprised by the fact. He sat on the rock on Naruto's other side and let out a long breath that seemed to carry most of the last 48 hours with it. "So," he said, "everybody's alive. That's good, that's really good." "Vegeta?" Naruto asked. "Injured, refusing treatment until he's finished being angry about how the fight went. Piccolo's patching him up anyway, which Vegeta is tolerating because his other option is continuing to bleed." Krillin paused. "They're getting along about as well as you'd expect." "Piccolo's treating him?" "Piccolo is extremely practical when it comes to keeping useful people functional," Krillin said. "It's one of his most underappreciated qualities." Bulma found the last Dragon Ball at the 12th hour. The search had taken everything she had, every sensor recalibrated, every capsule vehicle deployed. A grid search pattern executed with the focused ferocity of someone whose friends were still in danger even after the immediate threat was neutralized. Because Namek's Dragon Balls were still the only tool available for undoing everything Frieza's campaign had done to this world. She had not slept. She had not complained about not sleeping. which Krillin noted privately was more alarming than the not sleeping itself. When the seventh ball came up on her scanner, she made a sound that was technically a scientific confirmation of a successful search result and was actually closer to a sob. They gathered in the open plain as the eternal dragon Shenron's Namekian equivalent, Porunga, larger than anything that should have been able to exist in the space above them. Its presence rewriting the sky from an ambient light source into a specific event, rose from the assembled Dragon Balls, and regarded them with the impartial attention of something that was neither good nor evil, but was very old and had heard a great many wishes. Naruto stood at the edge of the group and watched this with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that were genuinely outside his experience. Open, absorbing, making no attempt to categorize it into something familiar before he'd properly seen what it actually was. Summoning jutsu he understood, giant creatures he understood. But this was different, something woven into the fabric of this universe's metaphysics, a mechanism for possibility that operated on principles his home dimension simply didn't contain. He felt Kurama stir with something that was not quite interest and not quite recognition. Naruto asked internally. This universe, Kurama said, has interesting architecture. Interesting or bad interesting. A pause that contained something Naruto had learned to read as reluctant admiration. Different interesting? Wishes were made. The Namekians who had died were restored, village by village, the life returning to them with the clean completeness of a reversal rather than a resurrection, not people brought back from somewhere else but people who had simply, suddenly not been dead after all. Elder Murray, whose dignified approach to Naruto on the first day felt like weeks ago rather than 2 days, stood in the middle of his restored village and looked at the world with the expression of someone who had returned from a place they had not expected to come back from and was choosing, deliberately, to be grateful for every detail of what they'd returned to. The third wish was for evacuation. The planet was unstable. Namek's geological systems had taken damage during the battle's most extreme exchanges that went beyond surface scarring. The deep rock fractured in ways that even its ancient geological patience couldn't absorb without consequence. They needed time. The Dragon Balls provided it in the organized movement of evacuation preparation, in the window of relative quiet between the battle's end and the next necessary action. Vegeta found Naruto. He came without preamble as he did everything, and stood in front of him with his arms crossed and the specific expression he wore when he was about to say something that required overcoming resistance he considered beneath him but was experiencing anyway. Naruto waited. Rasengan application against Recruitment. Vegeta said the targeting was precise. The angle compensated for his defensive posture without requiring a secondary follow-up strike. Thanks, Naruto said. That was not a compliment, that was an observation. A pause. It was an accurate observation. I know, Naruto said. You can just say thanks. Vegeta's jaw tightened slightly. What you did against Frieza, he continued, navigating around the thanks as if it were a physical obstacle. The sustained partnership mode. The shield position at the end. He looked at Naruto with the particular quality of assessment that was Vegeta's version of respect, not warm, not expressed with any of the conventional vocabulary of appreciation, but real, completely unmistakably real. That required reserves of a kind that are not purely physical. Yeah, Naruto said. Thing inside you, Vegeta said carefully. It chose to help you, not because it was forced. Naruto said. His name is Kurama, a beat. He chose to help you. Chose to help each other, Naruto said. That's what makes it work. Vegeta was quiet for a moment that stretched past its conversational weight into something more internal. Naruto watched him, not pushing, giving the silence whatever space it needed. He had learned from Gaara, who had come to partnership with his tailed beast from a starting point even harder than Naruto's own. From B, whose relationship with the Eight Tails was the most functional Jinchuriki bond Naruto had ever witnessed, that the concept of partnership with a power that had not chosen you initially was difficult for people to grasp from the outside. It required a revision of assumptions that most people had held long enough to feel like facts. Vegeta was revising something. Naruto could see it happening in the tightened set of his shoulders and the particular quality of his silence. Saiyan Great Ape Transformation, Vegeta said finally. When we transform under the full moon, the power is enormous, uncontrolled. The Saiyan self is subsumed. He stopped, started again. Kakarot's son, the boy, his transformation today, he does not lose himself. Gohan, Naruto considered this. No, he's learning to carry it. It takes time. It took time. Years, Naruto said honestly. And it wasn't just time, it was I had to actually deal with Kurama, not manage him, deal with him, understand what he was and why he was the way he was and what had been done to him that made him that way. He paused. He had reasons, good ones actually if you knew the history. Vegeta was very still. Power that has reasons, Vegeta said very quietly, is different from power that simply is. Yeah, Naruto said, completely different. Silence that followed was the longest one they had shared, and it had a different texture than the ones before it. Not the silence of two people in proximity who had not yet decided what they were to each other, but the silence of two people who were beginning to understand something and were giving it room to be understood properly. Vegeta uncrossed his arms. He did not say thank you. He walked away. But the walk was different from how he had walked away from Naruto before. Less the walk of a man creating distance and more the walk of a man who had somewhere to go and was going there. Naruto watched him and thought about Sasuke, and how long it had taken, and how completely it had been worth it. Elder Murray came to him at the last hour before evacuation was complete. The elder moved with the unhurried dignity that seemed native to Namekians of his age and standing. The quality of someone who had learned that patience was not passive but was itself a form of action. He sat beside Naruto on a low rock at the edge of the village that had been restored by the Dragon Balls, the village Naruto had spent his first morning on Namek helping to protect, and looked at the amber to gold sky with the expression of someone reacquainting themselves with a view they had expected never to see again. You did not have to help us, Murray said. I was here, Naruto said. There were kids in the village. That is not, for most beings, a sufficient reason. It is for me. Murray regarded him with the particular attention of an elder who had developed, over a long life, the capacity to see past what people said to what they were. You are far from your home, he said. You carry something ancient and powerful and you have made peace with it. You fight for people you did not know 3 days ago with the same commitment you would fight for your own village. He paused. These are not common qualities. My village didn't always think much of me, Naruto said. The admission was easy now. It had taken years to become easy, but it was. I had to figure out what I was for on my own mostly. Turns out the answer was the same whether they wanted me or not. What is the answer? Naruto looked at the restored village, the buildings that should have been ash, the Namekians moving through them with the careful reverence of people who understood they had been given something back. Children who had been dead 20 hours ago. Elders whose knowledge and history and quiet dignity had been 2 hours from permanent erasure. This, he said. Exactly this. Murray was quiet for a moment. Then he placed one large green hand briefly on Naruto's shoulder, the gesture of an elder acknowledging a warrior, simple and complete, and rose to return to his people. Goku found him at the edge of the inland sea. Of course he did. He sat beside Naruto with the easy naturalness that was simply how Goku existed in the world, comfortable in any space, adapting to any emotional register, carrying none of the social self-consciousness that made most people uncertain where to put themselves. He had a senzu bean in his hand, which he offered to Naruto with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone giving a friend something they needed. Naruto took it, ate it. Felt the restoration move through his depleted system like a tide coming in, chakra reserves refilling from empty in a way that was slightly different from his normal recovery. The senzu's strange biochemical magic interacting with his system in ways that Bulma would probably want to catalog, filling the physical deficit even if the deeper exhaustion of extended full partnership mode would take genuine rest to address. You saved Gohan, Goku said. We saved Gohan, Naruto said. You finished it. I wasn't there for the middle part, Goku said. You and Vegeta and Piccolo, you held it. Without that there's no end for me to finish. He looked at the sea with the thoughtful expression he wore when he was being serious about something that mattered to him. I felt it when the transformation happened. I felt what you were doing. The chakra mode, that thing you and Kurama do together. He paused. That's real partnership. I've trained with a lot of strong people and I've never felt anything quite like it. Kurama's special, Naruto said. So are you, Goku said simply. For making him that way, Naruto looked at the water. Something moved behind his sternum that was complicated and warm and didn't need a more specific name than that. Need to get home, he said. Someone I care about was in danger when I got pulled here. I don't know how much time has passed on my side. Bulma's working on it, Goku said. She's been working on it since day one, actually. She said the dimensional displacement has a signature she can trace. He paused. She'll find it. She finds everything. How long? She said a day, maybe two. He glanced at Naruto sideways. You're welcome to eat everything in the capsule pantry while you wait. I'll probably be doing the same. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the worry about home, the particular weight of having been away from his world for days during something critical, Naruto laughed. It was the real kind, unguarded and genuine, surprised out of him by the complete sincerity of the offer. Yeah, he said. Okay. The dimensional trace took Bulma 31 hours. She found it the way she found everything, through the application of intelligence to available data with a stubbornness that bordered on the philosophical, refusing to accept that a problem was unsolvable simply because the tools for solving it didn't exist yet, and building the tools herself. The rift Naruto had come through had left a residual signature in Namek's atmosphere, a harmonic disruption in the local spacetime that faded with every passing hour but had not yet faded past the threshold of her detection equipment. She could recreate it. A one-way opening, a window rather than a door, pointed at the dimensional coordinates of the signature's origin. She could not guarantee it would deposit him at the exact moment he'd left. Dimensional time differentials were complicated, and she was working with equipment not designed for this specific application. But she could get him close. Naruto stood at the edge of the rift she'd generated and looked at it with the focused attention of someone committing a place to permanent memory. The whole group was there. Goku with his easy warmth, Gohan with his careful intensity that had loosened over the last 2 days into something younger and less guarded. Krillin, who had made Naruto promise to come back if he ever found a way to dimension hop on purpose, which Naruto had not promised but had not denied. Piccolo, who stood at the group's edge and gave Naruto a single nod that contained within it everything his personality precluded him from saying directly, which Naruto received and understood completely. Bulma, who was running final diagnostics on the rift generator with one hand and holding a datapad of readings she'd taken of Naruto's chakra signature with the other, because Bulma briefs did not let a scientific opportunity pass regardless of the emotional content of the moment surrounding it. And Vegeta stood apart from the group, arms crossed, saying nothing. But he was there, and being there for Vegeta was the statement. Naruto turned to Gohan last. Hey, Gohan said. Hey, Naruto said. He reached into the small field kit he'd been carrying and produced a Kunai standard issue, the grip worn from use, the balance point exactly where it should be. He held it out. Shinobi tradition, he said. When you make a bond with someone, you give them something that can find its way back to you. The flying thunder god technique, that's not how it works here, I know, but the idea is the same. He paused. If you ever need me and there's any way across, throw that, I'll feel it. Gohan took the Kunai. He held it with both hands, the way Naruto had held the water container from Muri's village, the way you held something that was more than what it physically was. Keep it, Gohan said. I know. Naruto looked at him, this boy who had been the first to treat him like a person rather than a variable, who had sat with him by the alien sea and talked about faith and fathers, and the complicated love of someone who was also your most impossible problem. Who had learned the first step of chakra sensing from him at dusk 2 days ago with the bright, genuine wonder of someone discovering something new. You're going to be extraordinary, Naruto said. You already are, you just haven't finished finding out how much. Gohan's jaw tightened briefly with the effort of keeping his expression composed. He managed it. You too, he said. When you get back, whatever you got pulled away from, you're going to finish it. Yeah, Naruto said. I am. He turned to the rift. Kurama stirred, not in opposition but in recognition, the full-body awareness of something that had paid attention to this place and these people and was filing them away in the permanent record it kept of everything it had witnessed in its centuries of existence. Naruto felt the weight of that archiving, the way Kurama's memory worked, precise, total, indelible. "What do you think?" Naruto asked him quietly. "Different universe," Kurama said. "Different rules. Different kind of strong." A pause that contained something that would have been fondness from a being with less pride. "Worth knowing." "Yeah," Naruto said. He stepped through. The rift closed behind him like an exhaled breath, clean and complete, and where it had been there was only Namek's amber sky and the inland sea's slow breathing, and a group of people standing in the residual warmth of something that had passed through their world and left it changed in ways that were going to take time to fully understand. Gohan looked down at the kana in his hands. The grip was worn smooth from use, the metal carrying the faint residual warmth of the chakra that had held it for years. It was an ordinary object. It was not ordinary at all. He closed his fingers around it. "Dad," he said quietly to the air beside him. Goku, who had been watching the closed rift with the thoughtful expression he wore for things he intended to think about for a long time, turned to his son. "Yeah, I want to train harder," Gohan said. "Not just to get stronger, I want to learn what he was doing, the sensing technique, the way he thought about fighting." He looked at his father. "The way he thought about the thing he carried." Goku studied him for a moment with the specific attention he gave to things that mattered. Then he smiled, "The real one, the complete one." "Okay," he said, "let's do that." Vegeta, who had heard this exchange and processed it in the private architecture where he kept things he was not yet prepared to express, uncrossed his arms. He did not say anything. He walked toward the evacuation transport, and his walk was different from how he had walked before Naruto arrived, still proud, still contained. Still carrying the compressed weight of everything he was, but something in it had shifted a degree towards something that had not been there when the story started. Piccolo watched him go, and allowed himself a single thought that he kept entirely to himself, that the most lasting changes were almost never the dramatic ones. They were the small recalibrations, the private decisions made in the aftermath of witnessing something that offered a different way of thinking about a problem you had carried for a very long time. The evacuation transport doors opened. Namek, ancient and scarred and restored in all the ways that could be restored, breathed its slow geological breath beneath them. The three suns continued their eternal rotation. Somewhere between dimensions in the non-space that existed between one universe and the next, Naruto Uzumaki traveled home. It lasted no time at all. It lasted longer than he could measure. Dimensional transit did not operate on the clock-face logic of ordinary movement, and Naruto, who had been through enough strange spaces in his life, the corridors of Kaguya's dimensions, the interior landscapes of his own mindscape, the peculiar non-places that existed at the edges of large-scale space-time ninjutsu, had learned not to fight the in-between. You arrived when you arrived. Resistance only made the journey worse. He used the time to think. Not planning required information he wouldn't have until he was back, and the situation he'd been pulled from was too fluid for plans made in transit to survive contact with reality. He thought instead about what had happened, the full accounting of it, honest and complete, the way he'd learned to account for things from Jirkia, who had believed that understanding your experiences was the only way to actually keep them rather than just having them and moving on. He had arrived on a planet at war, in a universe with rules he didn't know, with no allies and no information and no guarantee of getting back. He had made friends. He had fought beside people who had no reason to trust him and every reason to treat him as a variable to be managed. He had gone to his limits against something genuinely beyond his current ceiling, and held the line anyway, not through power alone, but through the specific refusal to let the people behind him become the cost of the conflict in front of him. Kurama had stood up, fully, publicly, without reservation. Had let himself be felt, had deepened the partnership beyond what their previous interactions had required, had taken the contaminated energy of a grieving planet and made it workable through centuries of raw knowledge and the willingness to apply it in service of something he'd chosen to care about. They had done that together. Naruto thought about Gohan, who was going to be extraordinary and probably already understood it on some level, but hadn't yet found the version of himself that could hold that knowledge without flinching. He thought about Goku, who was the most uncomplicated, genuinely good person he had ever met, and who carried that goodness with an ease that suggested he had never once considered the alternative. He thought about Vegeta, who was complicated in ways that were entirely familiar to Naruto, the person who used pride as load-bearing architecture because the alternative was examining what was underneath, and who was very slowly beginning to consider the structural survey. He thought about Piccolo giving him calibration help with Namek's natural energy at no benefit to himself, purely because it was the useful thing to do. About Krillin's cheerful resilience, the kind of courage that didn't announce itself. About Bulma building a dimensional gateway with equipment not designed for the purpose because the problem existed and she was there, and those two facts were sufficient. And he thought about Elder Murray's hand on his shoulder, and the children running through the restored village, and the specific quality of a world given back to itself. Worth it, Kurama confirmed from his settled depth. Naruto agreed he came through the other side mid-step, which was the only way to come through a dimensional transit that deposited you into the middle of an ongoing situation. Not slowly, not with adjustment time, but fully present and moving, the muscle memory of his interrupted action picking up exactly where it had been severed. The battle was still happening. He did not have time to calculate how much time had passed on his side. The answer was in the scene in front of him. The combatants still in their positions, the terrain still shaped by the same exchange he'd been pulled from, the specific configuration of forces suggesting that his absence had been measured in seconds rather than days, the dimensional transit's time differential having compressed his 3 days on Namek into something that did not register on Konoha's clock at all. He had 3 seconds to take it all in. The scene, the positions, the threat. Sasuke at the far side of the engagement, bleeding from his left shoulder, holding ground with the specific focused intensity of someone who had decided that this particular ground was where they were going to stand and nothing was moving them from it. Naruto recognized the posture the way he recognized his own reflection. That was the posture of someone who had run out of backup plans and was operating on pure core. The threat bearing down on him was significant. Naruto hit it from behind with a tailed beast chakra arm at full partnership output. The golden shroud already active from the transit, Kurama's energy still warm and present from the hours of deployment on Namek, and expressing the opinion that this situation was manageable and that Naruto should stop hesitating and handle it. The impact was definitive. In the ringing silence that followed, Sasuke turned and looked at him. His expression cycled through approximately 6 things in 2 seconds. Shock, relief, calculation, the specific irritation of someone who had been covering for an absence they hadn't been informed about, and underneath all of it, buried where most people wouldn't have found it, the clean, simple warmth of someone seeing a person they'd been worried about and discovering the worry was unnecessary. Where, Sasuke said, were you? Different universe, Naruto said. Long story. Are you okay? Your timing is as bad as ever. You're welcome, Naruto said. Sasuke looked at the golden shroud, the chakra mode sitting on Naruto with the comfortable ease of something fully integrated. Something in his assessment shifted slightly. You learned something, he said, not a question. Yeah, Naruto said. Some interesting people taught me some things. He let the shroud fade and stood in his own skin in the familiar air of his own world and felt, all the way through, the specific quality of home. I'll tell you about it later. Later, Sasuke agreed, which for them was a contract. There are stories that change their characters and stories that change their worlds, and the best ones manage both simultaneously. What Naruto Uzumaki brought to Planet Namek was not simply power. The Dragon Ball universe had power in quantities that dwarfed most of what he could produce, had beings who could move celestial objects and entities whose thoughts could reshape reality. Power was not the scarcity. What Naruto brought was something the universe had in shorter supply than it knew, the specific, stubborn, clear-eyed insistence that the people behind you were worth every cost of standing in front of them. Not heroically, not with performance or announcement, just as a fact. The way gravity was a fact, not because you decided it was true each time, but because it was simply what you were made of. He arrived in a universe at war and made it personal. He turned a tactical engagement into something that required the people fighting it to remember why the tactical mattered in the first place. Not the Dragon Balls, not the strategic value of Namek's resources, not the power scaling calculations or the faction positioning or the cosmic implications of Frieza's potential immortality, but the children in the village and the elders' dignified patience, and a 12-year-old boy standing guard over his father's unconscious body with everything he had. That is not a small thing to introduce to a universe. Gohan carried the kunai home in a pocket he specifically reserved for it. In the months that followed, during training sessions that pushed past every ceiling he'd previously accepted as fixed, he would sometimes take it out and hold it not for comfort exactly, but for the specific quality of reminder it contained, that there were ways of being strong he hadn't yet explored. That partnership with the thing you carried was different from and better than control of it. That someone who had come from nothing, wanted by no one, had looked at the world and decided it was worth protecting anyway, and had never once through any of it lost the essential quality of himself. He trained differently after Namek. The results in time would surprise everyone who had previously calculated his ceiling. Vegeta did not speak of Naruto directly for a long time. He did not need to. What had shifted in him was architectural, a change in the foundational assumption that the thing you carried was a problem to be overcome rather than a relationship to be negotiated. He examined this privately with the thoroughness he applied to everything, and found that the examination was more productive than he had expected and more uncomfortable than he had wanted. Both of these things were appropriate. Growth that didn't cost anything wasn't growth, it was just repositioning. In time, the Saiyan who had believed that pride was the same thing as strength would begin to understand the difference. Piccolo filed the chakra sensing technique into the precise mental archive he maintained for knowledge worth keeping and said nothing to anyone about it, because Piccolo did not announce his intentions. He simply became, gradually, someone who could sense the world in two distinctly different ways simultaneously, which made him already formidable self considerably more so. He did not credit this to anyone in particular, but in quiet moments on quiet rooftops, he sometimes found himself thinking about a teenage boy explaining that the technique was less about projecting and more about listening. He thought it was good advice beyond the technique. Goku thought about Naruto the way he thought about all the remarkable people he'd encountered across his extraordinary life, with the warm, uncomplicated appreciation of someone who genuinely believed that meeting interesting people was one of the best things existence had to offer. He had felt the chakra partnership from the inside of a battle and understood something from that feeling that he could not have understood from a description, something about the nature of power that was chosen rather than inherited, built rather than born into. He carried it forward in the way he carried everything, not as a lesson exactly, but as a color added to how he saw things. The Dragon Ball universe did not forget Naruto Uzumaki. It changed in ways that were difficult to trace directly back to a blonde teenager who had fallen from a dimensional rift and stayed for 3 days and left a kunai behind. But the changes were real, and they were the kind that compounded, the kind that moved through people, and then through the people those people affected, rippling outward through time in the specific way that genuine encounters rippled. In a village hidden in leaves, on the other side of the dimensional membrane that separated two universes that had briefly and significantly touched, a young man finished a battle that had been interrupted, and told his best friend a long story about a planet with 3 suns and an alien sea and people worth knowing. He told it the way he told all his important stories, without embellishment, without performance, letting the truth of it carry its own weight. Sasuke listened with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered to Naruto, which was everything, whether he announced it or not. When Naruto finished, they sat in the comfortable silence that had taken them years to build and was now one of the most valuable things either of them possessed. An ancient fox and a Saiyan, Sasuke said finally. You found someone like you. Few of them, actually, Naruto said. Of course you did, Sasuke said, with the particular tone that meant he was not surprised and was also, underneath the not surprised, something warmer than he was going to name directly. Inside Naruto, behind bars that were a door that was open most of the time now, Kurama settled deeper into the comfortable quiet of rest. The Namekian natural energy had long since cleared from his system, but the memory of the planet, its ancient geology, its amber light, the strange resonance of a world that had been through devastation and been given back to itself stayed. Worth knowing, he had said. He maintained that assessment. Some things encountered unexpectedly in unlikely places turned out to matter in ways you hadn't expected and couldn't have planned for. A different universe, a different kind of strength. People who had found their own versions of the answer to the same fundamental question. What do you do with the enormous and difficult thing you carry? You make it a partner, you hold the line, you remember who's behind you. That was the answer Naruto Uzumaki had brought to the Dragon Ball universe, carried in his chakra and his shadow clones, and his absolute refusal to let the people behind him become the cost of what was in front of him. It was not a new answer. It was not a sophisticated answer. It was, in the end, the oldest answer there was, the one that predated power scaling and faction politics and cosmic entities and dimensional mechanics. The one that worked across universes because it was not a universe-specific truth but a fundamental one. Some things, it turned out, translated perfectly. The three sons of Namek continued their eternal rotation, indifferent and magnificent. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, in the place where two universes had briefly, significantly touched, the echo of a partnership that had chosen itself against all probability continued to resonate, quieter now, but not gone, the way the best things were never entirely gone, only settled into the deeper frequencies where the permanent things lived. Believe it, more stories await.